Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Valash. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. We still have a few minutes before 8, so I'm going to put it on mute, shut off my video here for a few. I anticipate, again, starting probably about 8:05, like we've done pretty consistently, just to allow enough people to join so that everybody can take part. Again, really the intent here is to make sure that we have everybody in the room for the discussion, and not necessarily that we start punctually at 8 a.m. But I do appreciate you joining us today, and look forward to our discussion.
No. Okay, so it's on mute. It says mute, so that means we're on mute, right? So they can't hear us.
Yeah.
Oops, there it is.
Ma'am, I think I have it. You may have it the other way around. Right now you're unmuted. If I hit the mute button, a little red indicator appears next to your name there. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Mark Valash. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. Thank you for joining us. And again, seeing that there's still a handful of folks that are joining, so we'll give them a few more minutes to join in. This is an adoption hearing, again, for a handful of regulations that we'll cover here and go into some detail in a moment. Ask your patience while everybody else joins, and then we'll kick things off. But thank you again for joining us this morning. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Mark Voloshin. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. Thank you for joining us this morning. I've got 8:05, so we're going to go ahead and start this. I do understand that some folks are still going to be joining, but in the interest of respecting your time, we will begin the adoption hearing. Okay, so along those lines, I am calling this hearing to order at 8:05. For the record, I am Mark Washoe, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, and I will be conducting this adoption hearing today. Before we begin, I want to clarify a few things. Our discussion today should be, during this adoption hearing, will be focused on the proposed regulations listed in the agenda. We should not discuss changing statutes, which are, of course, created by the legislature. This regulatory process will not alter any existing laws. This adoption hearing is not the end of the regulations process, nor was it the beginning. Following the completion of this adoption hearing today, the next step is the Legislative Commission on February 28th at 1 p.m. I'm going to copy the link into the chat right now that will take you to the Legislative Commission website that will provide the meeting information when it is made available. There it is. Regarding the adoption hearing today, and as a reminder, there are 3 ways to indicate you wish to make a public comment. Click on the raise hand icon in Zoom, which is at the bottom. And if you don't see it there, there's a more option with some dots above it. It'll be in there. You can physically raise your hand, or you can state in the chat that you would like to make a comment. And if there are general questions about elections procedures, I'll be able to discuss them as long as they relate to the proposed regulation. If there are questions that extend beyond the regulations on the agenda, I would be more than happy to set up a separate meeting at another time. To do so, please contact me at nblect@sos.nb.gov. I will copy that email address into the chat as well so that you have it. Finally, participants in this adoption hearing are reminded to treat one another with dignity and respect. This includes the use of the chat, which is primarily intended to enable participants to indicate they wish to make a public comment. This is the adoption hearing for the Secretary of State Elections Division's proposed regulations with the following LCB file numbers: R080-21P, R081-21P, R082-21P, R083-21P, R084-21P, R110-21P, R111-21P, and R112-21P. The draft text of all proposed regulations has been provided, as are the statements required pursuant to NRS 233B.0603. The notice of intent to act upon a regulation was noticed at all required locations on December 30th of 2021. A workshop was held to solicit public comment on January 21st of 2022. Since then, the Secretary of State has continued to receive written feedback relating to the proposed regulations that we will discuss today. I will address some, but not every one of the proposed suggestions and comments received. Some of the suggestions have been incorporated into these proposed regulations. In those cases, the amended text will be described in detail, but the final version of the text will be available prior to the Legislative Commission on February 28th. Other suggestions will require further research and analysis over coming months, but may be considered for separate regulations following the 2022 election cycle. Some suggestions conflicted with existing statutes or exceeded the scope of these regulations and were not considered. And finally, the Secretary of State had a number of requirements to weigh the consideration of the provided public comments. These proposed regulations were drafted in order to, 1, update the regulations as required by NRS 233B.050, 2, to clarify expectations for the clerks and registrars, and 3, to increase transparency for the public. While many of these proposed regulations create additional requirements for the clerks, registrars, and the Secretary of State staff, it is important to recognize that the work required by our state and county election officials has increased in the last few years, and there are no good metrics upon which to base future requirements. The 2020 election cycle was unique and had a number of factors that directly affected voter turnout and clerk and staff requirements. Many of the issues present in 2020 are not the same in 2022. For example, the state received $4.5 million in CARES Act funding to support the additional needs of the 2020 election cycle. Those funds are no longer available. Therefore, we do not have a clear precedent to look to for future election cycles. Altering these proposed regulations to make them more stringent or to increase requirements could make them impossible to accomplish. Therefore, in many cases, we are moving forward with these measured, reasonable improvements, but with an eye on future modifications that will be based on lessons learned during the 2022 election cycle. Agenda item 2, public comment on matters other than previously listed LCB file numbers. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. At this time, if anybody is interested in making a public comment regarding a matter not on the agenda, please identify yourself. And by the way, again, at all times for public comment, please do state your name clearly for the record, so that way I can take notes on it as well. So anybody interested in making public comment on a matter not relating to the agenda or an item on the agenda, please go ahead and indicate so now in Zoom. Ms. White, good morning.
Good morning. I'm just wondering, all of the proposed regulations, are they the result of new legislation, or are they going back to prior legislation and cleaning some stuff up?
A combination of both. When we started the holistic review of all of the regulations relating to Title 24, we started again with NAC 293, went through all of them to 306. Any regulation that related, we looked at and first and foremost thought, has there been a required change based on recent legislation, or is there an opportunity to update? And you'll have noticed, I think, in some of the text of these regulations, previous language included, that the clerks could notify by certified mail, and we added also by email, those sorts of updates. So it is both updates based on the 2021 legislative session, as well as just a good review and modernization as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, is there anybody else interested in making a public comment about something not on the agenda? Okay. In that case, we will move on to the regulations. It is noted for the record that the regulations will be addressed one at a time in numerical order. Public comment will be taken in the same order, and public comment on a particular regulation will be closed before moving on to the next regulation. Before public comment is opened on each regulation, I will read into the record a summary of the proposed changes from the legislative digest that you have seen in the agenda and in that text provided, as well as any applicable changes based on public comment. So at this time, I'll open the adoption hearing regarding proposed amendment or proposed regulation with LCB file number R080-21. First, I will read the legislative digest first. Under existing law, the Secretary of State is required to adopt regulations necessary for the execution and enforcement of the provisions of Title 24 of NRS. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to adopt regulations for the conduct of elections in all cities and counties. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which certain uniformed military and overseas voters may register to vote, apply for, and cast a military overseas ballot. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to allow the system of approved electronic transmission to be used by 1, an elector with a disability to register to vote, and 2, a registered voter with a disability to apply for and cast a ballot. Existing law further requires the Secretary of State to 1, prescribe the form and content of a declaration for use by an elector or registered voter with a disability to swear or affirm specific representations, 2, prescribe procedures to be used by local election officials in accepting, handling, and counting ballots received from a registered voter with a disability using the system of approved electronic transmission, and 3, adopt any regulation necessary to carry out these provisions. Section 3 of this regulation authorizes a registered voter who is unable to vote in person or timely return a mail ballot due to 1, an illness or disability resulting in the registered voter being confined to a hospital, sanatorium, dwelling, or nursing home, or 2, the registered voter being suddenly hospitalized, becoming seriously ill, or being called away from home to submit a request to a local elections official to use the system of approved electronic transmission to cast a return ballot. Section 3 also requires that the local election officials send certain information to the registered voter. Section 4 of this regulation sets forth the declaration that the registered voter must submit with his or her ballot. Section 5 of this regulation provides that if a local election official receives a request for a ballot from a registered voter pursuant to Section 3, after a mail ballot has been sent to the registered voter, the local election official must indicate that the mail ballot is canceled in the mail ballot record. Section 6 of this regulation provides that if a local election official sends a ballot to a registered voter pursuant to Section 3, the local elections official must, 1, cause a unique identification number to be included on the ballot, 2, record certain information in the ballot record, and 3, maintain the original ballot card in a secured area. Section 7 of this regulation requires not later than 60 days after the election, each local election official to report to the Secretary of State certain information related to ballots sent to registered voters pursuant to Section 3. Section 2 of this regulation defines the term local elections official. Existing law provides that each county clerk is encouraged to notify the public through means designated to reach members of the public who are elderly or disabled of certain election information, including that an elector with a disability may register to vote and a registered voter who is disabled may request and cast a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniform military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require the county and city clerk to provide notice of the availability of voting aids and procedures for voters voting by absent ballot. Sections 8 and 9 of this regulation provide that the county and city clerk must provide notice of the procedures for using these system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniformed military and overseas voters pursuant to Section 3. Now, this regulation in particular received a significant amount of public feedback as well that I'm going to pull up right now. 1 moment, please. Most of the suggestions regarding this regulation were either to strike it completely or to heavily modify the proposed regulation. Upon further discussion with the Secretary of State, she has decided to not move forward on this regulation. Instead, she intends to hold this regulation back, not to, of course, erase or delete it, but simply not move it forward to the Legislative Commission on February 28th. Instead, we're going to use the 2022 election cycle to review and closely monitor this requirement based on the needs of the voters and possibly alter or resubmit this regulation following the 2022 election cycle. This was also part of the discussion that we had over this regulation related to the fact that Assembly Bill 321 increases significantly voter opportunities to cast a ballot from home, so that even if somebody is sick, again, it is very likely that they will have received a mail ballot and be able to use that. So there's a possibility that this proposed regulation, or at least elements of it, would be moot. So again, this will not be moved forward and instead will be tabled for possible discussion and maybe inclusion in our 2022, our post-2022 regulations, proposed regulations. At this time, I will open public comment regarding proposed regulation R080-21. If anybody is interested in providing public comment relating to this regulation, please go ahead and indicate so in Zoom now. Mrs. Yu, I'm guessing your name is, sir, would you mind please unmuting and state your name for the record? Oh, I'm sorry, sir, you're still on mute. I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record and your time starts.
It's Robert Moore. I'm using my wife Alice's Zoom, so sorry about that. Can we have, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I think we all appreciate it. We need to get more involved as a community. What is the general scale of these exceptions? When I read it through last night, I'm saying, well, are there thousands of people that fall into this category? Tens of thousands of people? Are we talking about 2 or 3? And I understand every single person has the right legally, a legal resident, a legal voter has the right to vote. But I would like to have an idea of the scale we're talking about.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So certainly the scale is small. We're talking realistically less than 100. I think in fact, I think ever required it based on what information I remember hearing. Again, just like you said, every voter counts and every voter matters. So there's a pretty safe assumption that, again, at the very least, we're not clear on the implications of how that pool of individuals would be impacted by the inclusion of, or by the passage rather, of Assembly Bill 321. So that, while that was a pre 2021 legislative session concern for the clerks on how we could address individuals who this situation falls into, it may, again, as I mentioned, may no longer be either as large of a pool of people or maybe significantly smaller.
And May I have a follow-up to that?
Of course.
Okay. I'm just concerned that we have another Wisconsin kind of situation where the abuse becomes, infinite. Hundreds of thousands of people say, "Oh, I'm sick, so I'm going to take this approach." And I did see there were some protections against that, but maybe the other members who are participating today can discuss this as well. I don't know that it's sufficient because I'm not qualified to know what's going to be done, but I don't want to be another victim of a diluted ballot.
Yes, sir. I understand and appreciate your comments. Again, as mentioned, this one will not be moving forward into regulation or to legislative commission. Looking at the chat real fast, it's early, but I would like to remind everybody to maintain some sense of decorum, dignity, and respect. Never too early to treat each other properly and be understanding, and maybe keep our comments again that are unprofessional to ourselves. But thank you, Mr. Moore. I do appreciate your comments and your time. Ms. White, please. Good morning.
Good morning. I was just I'm sure you take notes for future regulations. And so could you please explain how is someone with a disability documented as serious enough to request that printing of a ballot? I mean, how do we confirm that they truly have a disability? Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you for your comments. So first of all, I think when we get to the next proposed regulation, it does more directly affect or describe Assembly Bill 121. So I think maybe your question might be more suited for that. If it's possible, I'll hold on to that question and answer it here as soon as we're done with this adoption hearing. Is that all right?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Martinez, good morning.
Yes, good morning. For the record, Cindy Martinez, Vice Chair of the Washoe County Republican Party. And I am acknowledging that this is not moving forward, but I think for the record that there should be some kind of discussion, at least for consideration in the future. This particular regulation and the aspect relating to it in the statute obviously opens up other opportunities for fraud, as our friends have said here before. So I think going forward, the absentee ballot process in its purest form is the best solution to that. And I know that that's not a topic for conversation, but just for the record, this whole process has created solutions in search of problems, which has created problems, which will probably invite more solutions that are problematic. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Sir, I'm guessing your name may not be Marilyn, or maybe it is, which is fine, of course, but would you mind taking yourself off mute and then stating your name for the record so I can copy it down?
Okay, sorry. James M. Bentham for the record. I had a question. What kind of safety procedures would be implemented to protect this from any abuse?
So certainly, sir, in the regulation itself, again, there was a number of different ways, including an affidavit, again, where individuals have to attest under penalty of perjury, which again is something that is carries the weight of law, and if they lie about it, that comes back on an individual. In regards to security, otherwise, and again, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more here in the next regulation. But the system that's used that we've had in place for some years now has a number of different security features to make sure that it's not exploited or abused. And with all ballots cast across the state, and whether that's in person or by mail or using the ease system that we'll talk about in this regulation referred to, every ballot cast is confirmed to be associated with a registered voter. If you walk into the state, you're allowed to do same-day registration. But again, even in that case, the clerks will confirm eligibility before that ballot is accepted. So this is, again, that all really ties together in a broader sense to make sure that only eligible voters are involved in our electoral process. And I can go into more technical details if you'd like, or perhaps we could set up a separate discussion. I could even run you through a demo of how the e-system works and all the different steps that we have relating to that.
Okay, I just want to voice my concerned that any possible changes should definitely have major safeguards. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your comments. At this time, is there anybody else interested in providing public comment relating to proposed regulation R080-21? Ms. White, yes, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to access the next proposed regulation and I'm getting a page not found 404. Can you update the link for that, please?
Yes, ma'am. I will take 2 seconds and then I'm going to, what I have in front of me is the adoption hearing. I can copy the link in this one document, 64 pages, and it has the text to all of the different regulations inside the same document. So if you give me 1 moment, please, I will copy and paste that in. Okay, I just copied into the chat a link to the document. Again, this is the 64-page notice of intent to act upon regulation. If you scroll down, it does on that first page have the hyperlinks to the individual regulations, but you'll see that if you just scroll down, is what I'm doing. That's kind of part of the reason I paused, by the way. You'll be able to get to the text of each regulation. Mr. Barry, would you mind stating your full name for the record so I can answer your question directly on Mr. Barry, can you hear me? Okay, well, once maybe he's typing it in. Once Mr. Barry puts his name in, then what I'll do is, again, the intent here is to make sure that everybody, even those that some individuals, again, that attend these hearings or that call in, may be visually impaired. So by reading the question out loud is my intent to make sure everybody is able to understand and hear the discussion we're having today. But once I get his name, I'll read that question. Yes, sir.
Also, when you begin again reading the different text, can you just give us the page number in case we're a little bit lost?
Certainly.
Okay, thanks. I think we're on page, was it 16? Yeah, 16 of 64 or something like that just now, right? When you just finished.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And I'm going to jump down to page 18 here as soon as we close the adoption hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, if there's no more public comment regarding the draft, the proposed regulation 080-21, then I will close public comment. Hearing no further public comment, proposed regulation LCB file number R080-21P is not adopted and will not move forward to the Legislative Commission. At this time, I will open the adoption hearing on proposed regulation R081-21P that can be found on page 18 of the PDF that I provided the link to. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to establish a system of approved electronic transmission through which certain uniformed military and overseas voters may register to vote, apply for a military overseas ballot, and cast a military overseas ballot. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to allow the system of approved electronic transmission to be used by 1, an elector with a disability to register to vote, and 2, a registered voter with a disability to apply for and cast a ballot. Existing law further requires the Secretary of State to 1, prescribe the form and content of a declaration for use by an elector or registered voter with a disability to swear or affirm specific representations. 2, prescribe procedures to be used by local elections officials in accepting, handling, and counting ballots received from a registered voter with a disability using the system of approved electronic submission. And 3, adopt any regulation necessary to carry out these provisions. Section 3 of this regulation provides that a person is an elector or a registered voter with a disability if the elector or registered voter, 1, has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of the elector or registered voter. 2, has a record of such impairment, or 3, is regarded as having such an impairment. Section 4 of this regulation requires a registered voter with a disability who applies for a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission to indicate whether 1, the local elections official must send the ballot to the registered voter by mail or approved electronic transmission, and 2, the registered voter will return the ballot to the local election official by mail or approved electronic transmission. Section 4 further requires the local election official to provide to the registered voter certain instructions depending on whether the registered voter will return the ballot by mail or approved electronic transmission. Section 5 of this regulation sets forth the form of the declaration to which a registered voter with a disability must swear or affirm. Section 6 of this regulation provides that if a local election official receives a request for a ballot from a registered voter with a disability after a mail ballot has been sent to the registered voter, the local elections official must indicate that the mail ballot is canceled in the mail ballot record. Section 7 of this regulation requires a local election official to 1, cause a unique identification number to be included on a ballot sent to a registered voter with a disability, and 2, record in the ballot record certain information related to a ballot sent to a registered voter with a disability. Section 8 of this regulation requires not later than 60 days after the election, a local elections official to report to the Secretary of State certain information related to ballots sent to voters with disabilities. Section 2 of this regulation defines the term local elections official. Existing law provides that each county clerk is encouraged to notify the public through means designated to reach members of the public who are elderly or disabled of certain election information, including that an elector with a disability may register to vote, and a registered voter who is disabled may request and cast a ballot using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniform military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require the county or city clerk to provide notice of the availability of voting aids and procedures for voting by absent ballot. Sections 9 and 10 of this regulation provide that the county or city clerk must provide notice of the procedures for registering to vote and voting using the system of approved electronic transmission established for certain uniform military and overseas voters. Existing regulations require that a local elections official provide instructions to a covered voter for marking and returning a military overseas ballot, including an explanation that the military overseas ballot and any other necessary voting materials must be received by the office of the appropriate elections official by 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the day of the election. Section 11 of this regulation provides instead that the instructions include an explanation of the deadline for a covered voter to cast and return the military overseas ballot and other necessary voting materials. Section 12 of this regulation revises the form of the declaration of a covered voter to eliminate obsolete language. In regards to proposed regulation R081-21P, we also received significant amounts of feedback regarding this proposed regulation. Most suggestions were either to strike it entirely or add requirement for documentation of the disability. After discussion, if this were intended as part of the bill, it would have been included in the bill language. It is important to note that this regulation specifically addresses the passage of Assembly Bill 121. Assembly Bill 121 was passed during the legislative session in 2021 and is now in effect in law. This regulation, again, really just addresses the implementation of that bill and provides clarity to both the clerks in regards to their expectations, as well as increased transparency as to how the process will work. Concerns about Section 4, subsection B6, specifically instruct the registered voter that the ballot may not be used by another registered voter or duplicated, have been addressed, and ballot duplication is not possible. This is not a process that one could get a ballot and then duplicate it, again, by simply copying and pasting. The ballots are, again, associated to an individual voter, and when that voter casts it or does not, like, again, if it comes in under somebody else's name or somebody else, if it's been altered at all, again, it will not be recognized. Recommendations to track ease ballots separate, the ease ballots separately are already underway, as are improved reporting procedures that will be implemented upon completion of our transition to a top-down voter registration system. And again, to clarify, based on the feedback and those comments there are no further changes to the text of proposed regulation R081-21P. At this time, if there's anybody interested in providing public comment regarding proposed regulation R081-21, please go ahead and indicate so in Zoom right now. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. Electronic transmission doesn't mean that the voter prints the ballot himself or herself. Is that correct? It is a document that is emailed to them. Is that correct? Oh,
It happened. I was waiting for it eventually. I apologize about that. So ma'am, there's a couple ways this works, but it's important to note that when we talk about a ballot in this regard, it's not a ballot as you've seen either in Carson City or anywhere else across the state or country for that matter. In fact, what it looks like is a ballot preference, not ballot preference form rather, but it's really just a list of the races and the candidates that is deliberately made in the system to not look like the ballots that you see when you're standing at the polls. The reason for that is because when this document is printed out, this process that we're talking about here, the individual can print it. They can email it back. There's a number of options, an electronic transmission option as well. What happens is that document is sent back to the clerks, again, across the state. They have to, if it's electronically sent, it has to be received before the close of the polls. If it's mailed back, then it falls under the same provisions of all other mail ballots, so that it's got to be postmarked by the day of the election, and it has to be received 4 days after. And if it's received beyond that, again, that ballot is not considered timely and is not counted. What it looks like though is when that document arrives either through one of those systems to the clerk, they have to duplicate it or transcribe what is provided in this kind of generic looking, not a ballot onto an actual ballot. This process is done typically with a bipartisan team or more. In some cases, the clerks do it themselves. Both documents are retained, of course, for 22 months pursuant to the requirements of federal and state law. Again, the idea is that if they say I'm voting for 1, 2, 3, and 4, the clerk will transcribe it, confirm it with somebody to make sure that there was no misinterpretations or confusion on it. Once it's confirmed that yes, the transcribed ballot is accurate, then it is put into the stack, so to speak, with the rest of the ballots and cast appropriately. There's also, by the way, and I kind of glossed over this, but I want to highlight it. The first step of it is truly to make sure that, again, as always, the voter is an eligible voter who, again, should have qualified to use this system. Again, pursuant to these regulations and the provisions of Assembly Bill 121.
okay, and so is there signature verification on that? However, they resubmit it back to you electronically or
Yes,
mail?
ma'am.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and how are observers able to observe the signature verification on those ballots?
Certainly, it's the same process is done, again, depending on the county, and the specifics are probably a little bit unique to each location, depending on where they do it. Again, even like locations of the fax machines, because this document can be provided via fax as well. But again, it's open to the same public transparency and observation as the rest of the processes. So it's the slight difference is that when an individual votes, casts a ballot through this system, there is a comment that because of the nature of the system and because of that requirement for the clerk to transcribe over onto the other onto a real ballot what the voter has submitted, that there is an indication that there's a possibility that the secrecy of the ballot may not be as thorough as otherwise would have occurred. But again, that's something that, again, collectively, I know the clerks all are very aggressive in making sure they're not looking at those sorts of things because they want to preserve that ability to the secrecy of the ballot as well.
Okay, so just last follow-up, the security of it is because it has a serial ID or something like that? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. That along with confirming the signature, confirming that the ballot came from the individual, confirming that the individual is in fact an eligible voter. And there's even been situations where yes, yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. And so I don't forget, you did ask a question in regards to the nature of the disability. So that is also included in NRS 426.068, defines in statute a disability, which is, again, I believe referenced in the regulation as well as in Assembly Bill 121.
Would you please repeat that NRS code?
Yes, ma'am. NRS 426.68, and I will put the link to that in the chat as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Martinez, please.
Thank you. For the record, Cindy Martinez, Washoe County Republican Party Vice Chair. Mark, I understand the process you're describing, and of course, the accuracy of receipt of that that proposed ballot and the way it's transcribed into a physical ballot. All of that, of course, is dependent upon the independent or the individual integrity of the people involved in the process. And of course, you can't mandate that by statute or regulation. My question then becomes, if I am a person who is using this process to cast a ballot in that manner, what confidence do I have, number one, that my electoral choices have accurately been represented? And two, can I verify that by asking to see the transcribed ballot? I'm guessing that you can't, because we can't see our ballots after they're cast. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. You're spot on. At the end of the day, is there an element of concern into how the process is done? There could be. You're right. While I know the clerks and I can speak to their integrity, can't speak to everybody in the state's integrity or everybody that volunteers to be part of the process. Is there a risk? I would suggest it's probably fairly low. I'd like to hope. But if, in regards to a voter wanting to see the transcription of what they provided as the real ballot, you're right. In the same sense that I can't, look at my own ballot after I turn it in to confirm, or after I vote on the machine, I can't, a week later go back to confirm it. Neither can they.
Yeah, that's quite troubling. And I go back to the original position, is that the absentee ballot process. Of course, it's different for our men and women overseas. I can understand that to be tightly controlled, but there's got to be a better way. So I just have grave concerns after what we saw in 2020 and what we're beginning to understand about our electoral process as a whole. Anytime you introduce human beings into a process, it is whether intentional or by negligence or not just paying, inattention. There's always problems that can be messed up, if you would say. I lost the word, not enough coffee. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. White, please.
I do know that before any electronic transmission was being discussed, mail-in ballots were sent to rehabilitation homes, convalescent homes, hospitals, et cetera. And many of those individuals there may be mentally impaired and not be able to complete, or physically impaired, not be able to complete the ballot themselves. And so they received assistance from employees at those rehab homes. This is a wide open door for fraud. And I know you said the legislation has already been passed, but there have to be better regulations written to protect from the abuse that is possible with this electronic transmission. Basically, every single electronically transmitted ballot is now a fraud potential, because we don't really know who's completing it, because the person who supposedly requested it might not have the mental or physical abilities to even have done the request. So I'm opposed to this completely, but I know you said it's legislation, but we need to put something protective in the regulations to prevent it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Guerrero, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Voloshin. Hope you're doing well. For the record, my name is Matilda Guerrero. I'm the Democracy Manager at Silver State Voices here on behalf of the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition. Under Assembly Bill 121, voters with disabilities may register to vote, as well as request and cast a UOCAVA ballot under NVEs, a system that has been used by members of the armed services, their spouse and/or defendants, and Nevadans residing overseas since 1986. In fact, one of my relatives and his whole platoon voted with a UOCAVA ballot during the 2020 general election. This regulation extends a decades-long program to a voting bloc that would be greatly benefit from it, as we heard it firsthand from impacted community members during the legislative hearings. Let Nevadans Vote believes that voting should be accessible to all eligible citizens, including voters with disabilities. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Moore, please.
I have two parts to this. The first, I just want to kind of join in with Cindy Martinez. I lived 30 years overseas, including up until last year. And I always thought my mail-in vote was really important. I would even fly to the US sometimes to vote, although I couldn't get to my state. I love voting. Yet after this 2020, I started questioning, did my 2020 get counted? Did my 2016 get counted? What about my 2012 or even the midterms? And I've lost complete faith in my 30 years of voting because of exactly what we said before. I don't know what happened when I signed everything, filled it in, asked my wife to check it to make sure, because I wanted to make sure that that vote counted. And I've lost faith in that. So I would also support in the future that we come up with a way that mail-in ballots, if they are transferred into a official ballot, that there's a receipt that comes back to that voter to say, yeah, we got you. Not only did we receive it, but here is an image of what your actual transcribed vote is. I'll move on to my other question, which is, if we're talking about overseas person like I was, and if we're talking about military, don't we know well enough in advance who these people are and how many there are, where that becomes a public number that we all know before Election Day, that there are 1,642 Nevadans that will be voting mail-in? And is there any way that that is tracked?
Mr. Moore, thank you for your question. I've made note of the recommendation in regards to trying to find a way to provide a receipt. You're right, there's definitely been a lot of discussion about less interest in secrecy of the ballot and more interest in having confidence that somebody will let somebody cast. But again, unfortunately, that exceeds the scope of these regulations and a number of other things. In regards to your second question, though, I spent a lot of time pondering that exact thing. My research indicated that at any given moment, there's between 10 and 12,000 Nevadans who are in our uniformed services. A little bit interesting to know, but when you think about the military, oftentimes people assume the DoD collectively falls under the same umbrella, is governed by the same administrative processes. But the reality is each of the services have Title X responsibilities to man, train, and equip their own forces. And as a result, there's a kind of amusing, almost at times, lack of communication between them in regards to their personnel. So if we were to try to identify the names of Nevadans who are in the military at any given day, we would have to go to each one of the services. And by the time we got the response, it would likely have changed significantly. Having served myself, about a third of my 20-year career in the Marine Corps was spent overseas. I also understand that at times you get deployed at a moment's notice. And while I lived overseas, my family for 4 years in Okinawa, Japan, and that was certainly a steady state. We could anticipate when the election was coming. There were times I was deployed one time within about 3 or 4 months of knowing it. And frankly, that was considered ample time to prepare myself and my family. So I know there are Nevadans who are in the uniformed services who do not realize it, but they will be deployed by the next shoot, either in June for the primary or by November for the general election. So it's always going to be a moving target. Also deployed, right, means different things. Even if you were born and raised in Carson City and then joined the military, if you are sent to Southern California, if that's where your duty station is, I mean, you're still away from home, you're still out of your state and unable to necessarily cast a vote in person. So it's not just necessarily people that are west of California and east of Virginia, overseas rather, that need to have this ability. But it's an interesting question, and it's certainly one that we're continuing to pursue ways to increase our outreach. I've noticed only about 1,200 uniformed and service personnel voted using the EASE system during the 2020 general election, and that's something I'm intending to increase our outreach to help spread the word about. Which, of course, as you well know, will mean phone calls late at night and early in the morning to accommodate others' time zones around the world. But in regards to a specific number that we could track or use as some sort of metric, unfortunately, it just doesn't exist. Mr. Parks, please, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. And by the way, thank you for your service to our country. Bruce Parks, Chairman of Washoe County Republican Party. The whole idea of electronic voting by this means flies in the face of the one person, one vote concept. Common sense would dictate that this is an opportunity for voter fraud that should not exist, should not stand. There's no way you can absolutely guarantee that the person that the ballot was intended for is the person that is filling it out and sending it in. Absolutely no way to guarantee that, and therefore this is a system that should not stand. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Parks. Ms. White, please.
Yeah, are there any other regulations where the electronic transmission of documents such as these ballots, is it anywhere else in the regulations where it's addressed besides this 293 or wherever?
Yes, ma'am. There's actually an entire chapter that specifically talks about the uniformed and it's the UOCAVA, Uniformed and Overseas Absentee Voter Act, Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voter Act. There we are.
Could you put that in the chat, please? And then I saw someplace in here, it mentioned 60 days where local election officials need to report on something. And I think it was talking about the electronically transmitted ballots. So 60 days is long after the election is certified. So if all of a sudden we get 30% of the ballots being electronically transmitted, that's a red flag that there's a problem there, and 60 days is too late to catch it. So why, can you just explain that whole 60-day thing and where it is in the regs?
Yes, ma'am. So first and foremost, I just copied the link to NRS 293D. Again, the UOCAVA Act, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act, is not the title of the chapter, which is a separate issue that I'll address as soon as we can. But 293D does talk about the electronic transmission to our military and overseas citizens that are as applicable. I also included the link to the regulations relating to 293D as well for your awareness. In regards to the 60-day notification, that there's a number of documents that have been transmitted from the clerks to the Secretary of State. 60 days was the timeline in that one. I think I understand your concerns though, and we'll take it as a recommendation for change. It is something too that as we transition to a top-down system in the coming years, that reporting timeline is going to go from, in some cases like this one, multiple weeks to almost instantaneously. And we'll be able to generate reports much more rapidly than we are able to now. So I agree. In fact, your concerns are one that we've discussed already at length, over the last year, because we want to know the increase in how these ballots are cast. As I mentioned during the 2020 election cycle, I believe it was 1,263 or so were cast using this E system. And so every one of those, right, is a clerk receiving a document in an email, having to confirm the voter, transcribe it onto an appropriate ballot. If that number goes up exponentially, that's a significant amount of work, as well, that the clerks would have to take care of in a very timely manner. So that's also something that we're keeping a close eye on to see if those resources that clerks have to accommodate these ballots cast by our military and overseas or disabled members of the disabled community. If again, this is something that will challenge their resources and need additional personnel and those sorts of things. So we are tracking it very closely though.
Okay, something you said was very concerning when you said as we're moving to a top-down system. Mm-hmm. That's concerning in itself. But then second, speed is not the main issue. Accuracy and integrity is the issue. And then if, like you said, if you got 1,000 plus of those electronically in the past, and then now we're going to say this next election, we end up with 45,000. Well, yeah, it's a lot more work for the office, but more importantly, it should flag that the system has been hacked, because you don't jump with those numbers, just like, it just doesn't make sense mathematically.
Yes, ma'am. So the top-down system, just to reference that, that was again directed pursuant to the passage of Assembly Bill 422. That's something outside of the scope today, but certainly able to talk about that process going forward as well. I do remember one of the advocates though talking about this during the passage of Assembly Bill 121, that as many as 1 in 6 voters would qualify for the use of this system. I believe that was the number. So we are anticipating a large jump. I don't know how many. Again, I don't necessarily think it would indicate that it's been hacked as much as possibly individuals are aware of and using the system as intended by the laws that again, these regulations simply relate to. But
That's just horrible. 1 in 6, where does that number come from?
Perhaps somebody else on the call can provide the details. I'll double check though and see if I can't find the source, but I remember it was one of the disabled community advocate, I believe, that identified that number during the legislative session.
Okay, so basically you're saying you're expecting 1/6 of all the total votes to be transmitted electronically.
No, ma'am. I think that, with the passage of Assembly Bill 321, I suspect a great number more will be submit via mail or turned in, again, using the mail-in ballots that are going out pursuant to Assembly Bill 321. And while I expect more than approximately 1,200, we really don't have, again, a good metric. There were so many unique instances from 2020. There were a number of changes in 2021 legislative session that, again, in our discussions with the clerks, that there really are no good metrics that we can use to anticipate all of the different changes and social factors and everything else, and how it's going to necessarily relate to the conduct of the 2022 election cycle.
I appreciate all the work you do. I believe you do it with a sense of integrity. However, I don't know how you can write these proposed regulations knowing that they are open doors to fraud. It's just, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Martinez, please.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And yes, thank you for your service. I'm a fellow Marine, so you just went up a couple notches in my estimation. I reasonably expect that you're going to honor your oath. It never expires. That's how many of us feel. So we're asking you to remember that. That slipped in. What do you mean by transition to top-down system? That kind of flew in there. That's rather concerning because that's not where the power of the Constitution lies. So would you help us understand what you mean by that?
Yes, ma'am. Again, slightly out of the scope of the regulations, but I will include the link to Assembly Bill 422 that directs this transition. Again, to be clear, this does in no way alter the conduct of the elections as you know it. Your clerks still run the elections at the county levels. They still have your county and city clerks, for that matter, again, as applicable. So those individuals remain responsible. Really, what Assembly Bill 422 directed, and I'll copy it in here right now, is when you think about, just to explain this very briefly, so I don't get poked about straying from the agenda. The way right now our statewide voter registration list works is that each of the 17 counties maintains their county-specific registration list. Every night, they send that information through a secure method to us at the state, and we aggregate it together and immediately check against the list of voters that we got from Office of Vital Records, the deceased voters. We check to see if any of the counties have duplicates. The idea that would indicate someone has moved from one county to another, and we would notify both clerks so that they could adjudicate and address that possible duplication. But because this is every night, basically it's a building of a new statewide voter registration list, there ends up being a lag. You may even remember that following the 2020 election, general election, there were concerns about the timelines that, again, were in statute. So it wasn't like the clerks or somebody here at the state were deliberately dragging their feet. But an important step in that process after an election is waiting till all of the provisional ballots that are cast at the county level are collected and the voters verified. One of the last things that we do is compare across the state all of that, the provisional ballots that are cast, so that we can make sure, excuse me, that nobody voted in Carson City, went to Story, went to Lyon, went to Douglas, went to Washoe, and attempted to cast a provisional ballot in all 5 of those counties. So that final check before we say, okay, good, this individual only cast a ballot in Lyon. We know that they're not on a provisional list. They were not registered in any other county. That process, again, is slowed down by the fact that each of the 17 counties has their own database. Each database, by the way, collects different information based on the systems, the election management systems that county has purchased and used or developed on their own, as the case may be. So by standardizing it, Assembly Bill 422 says we're going to have, instead of 17 databases with 17 different fields of information, we're going to have a singular database. This is frankly a best practice across the country. We're actually one of, I think, a handful now. We're down to, I think, 5 or so or less that do not have a top-down system. What it will be is a single database that all of the counties still have access to and still provide information to, but it will be able to be updated in real time. So that when you move right now from Clark County to Nye County, Clark County will inactivate and then ultimately cancel your registration. Nye County builds you a brand new one. Your vote history doesn't come with it. They don't know your party affiliation until you fill out your form. There's a complete rift in that communication between the county databases. Going forward, it will transition. You move from Clark to Nye County, we'll identify, hey, someone just registered in Nye County. They match this information that's already in our system, but it was in Clark. The clerks will communicate with the voter to confirm it, and then it'll just change your county. Your vote history will come over as well. So there's a number of ways that this is going to improve the security of our systems, the cleanliness of our statewide voter registration list, the timeliness of being able to check provisionals. So there's a number of perks to it. But absolutely, I think what your concern is, the clerks at the city and county level will still, and the counties for that matter, will still have their ability to choose their own voting systems, their election, whether it's Dominion or ES&S or any of the other EAC approved systems, the conduct, the locations of where they pick for polling, all of that, everything else that relates to the election, really everything that you notice as a voter will remain the same, with the exception of improvements to the cleanliness of the statewide voter registration list that I hope everyone notices, as well as the timeliness following the election. But let me copy that link over real fast for you, and then I'm going to jump back to the agenda so that I don't get in trouble. I've put the link to Assembly Bill 422 into the chat. Again, if there's any further questions about Assembly Bill 422, please reach out via NB Elect, and I'll be able to discuss those at that time. But right now, just getting back to the proposed regulation R081-21, please let me know if Mr. Parks, do you have a comment, please?
Yes, Mark, I just wanted to let you know that the whole idea of top-down system is long overdue. We encountered major problems when we were doing a petition drive to recall Governor Sisolak, and the biggest problem we encountered was the fact that it was a bottom-up system instead of a top-down. If a person had moved from Washoe County to Lyon County, they were not able to sign the petition, and they were just totally disenfranchised. This system is long overdue, and I'm glad to see that there's an effort on the part of the Secretary of State to correct that problem. It would have been up to the county clerks to confirm the signature, and since the person no longer lived in Washoe County, they now resided in Lyon County, there was no way to confirm their signature. With a top-down system, that problem goes away.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Parks. And the last thing I'll say, one of the requirements, we are absolutely focused on transparency and increasing the public's ability to request reports in a timely manner, so that you're able to again support everything from petitions to just questions about vote history. So there's a number of different public-facing features that we're planning on adding into the system to improve the voter experience across the state. Yes, sir. Ms. White, please.
So is the number of electronically transmitted ballots going to be available daily for the public?
Well, it's in progress. We're working to get to that goal, but it's unclear just yet when exactly that will be possible for implementation. It may be after the transition to a top-down system. It may be possible before that, but again, there's a number of factors. So it's something that we're working towards. But again, I don't have a deadline or a timeline necessarily that I'd be able to provide to you right now.
Okay, so the top-down will not be in effect in the 2022 or the primary?
No, ma'am. That again, this, as you can imagine, 17 different counties with systems that are unique and have different IT systems they're on and requirements and interfaces. Standardizing that is a lengthy and complex IT project, and something that we have to get right. Like, there is zero room for error. So we are not rushing that process. We're being very deliberate, very methodical, so that it's done correctly, because there are plenty of other locations where IT projects have gone disastrously, and this one cannot. So no, ma'am, it will not be in place for the primary or the general election in 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Moore, yes, please.
I'm shaking in my boots. I'm really scared. I like the top down, but what I don't like is that we're relying on either Dominion or any other IT system. That gives them complete control of all of our counties in the state. What are you doing, or what have we done, or what has been addressed so that we're not giving away our counting to a company like Dominion or any of the sister companies or any of the new companies that may come around?
So that is, again, I've unfortunately let this discussion get far outside the boundaries of our agenda. I'm more than willing to sit down and discuss the top-down transition, the numerous cybersecurity efforts that we're looking at and implementing in advance, as well as part of that. Of note, Dominion Systems does not have an option for a top-down election management system or voter registration system. So I don't believe they're one of the possible candidates. And frankly, we're well away from that part of the process anyway. But if possible, again, please reach out to the NV-Elect email, and I absolutely would enjoy sitting down to discuss it with you further.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Benton, please.
Okay, thank you. Earlier, we were talking about an electronic ballot coming in and then converted to a physical ballot. Are there going to be like at least 2 observers to check on that for the accuracy?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Always. As much as possible. You'll notice kind of a trend when it comes to election processes in general. The ideal situation is that it's done with a bipartisan team to ensure accuracy and to reduce the possibility of any question of malfeasance. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
At this time, are there any other public comments relating to proposed regulation R081-21P? All right. All right, and I mentioned previously that there were no additional changes to the text. Do appreciate everyone's discussion, but hearing no further public comment. Hearing no further public comment, the adoption hearing, the public comment on proposed regulation LCB file number R081-21P is closed, and proposed regulation LCB file number R081-21P is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. At this time, I will open the adoption hearing on proposed regulation LCB file number R082-21P. For those reading along on the document, we are now on page 34. Existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to campaign practices. If a candidate, person, organization, committee, political party, or nonprofit corporation that is required to file a campaign finance report or registration form pursuant to Chapter 294A of NRS fails to do so in accordance with the applicable provisions of that chapter, existing law provides that such a candidate, person, organization, committee, political party, or non-profit corporation is subject to a civil penalty. However, existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to waive such a civil penalty for good cause shown. Similarly, existing regulations authorize under certain circumstances the Secretary of State to waive or reduce such a civil penalty for good cause. This regulation provides that the Secretary of State will not waive or reduce such a civil penalty for good cause on the basis that the Secretary of State did not send a reminder notice that a report or form for registration was due before the applicable deadline. There was not that much public comment or feedback relating to proposed regulation R082-21. At this time, though, I will open public comment relating to it. If there's anybody that's interested in providing feedback or discussion regarding proposed regulation R082-21P, please go ahead and indicate so in Zoom now. Okay. Seeing no public comment, I will close public comment on proposed regulation R082-21P. Proposed regulation LCB file number R082-21P is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission.
You've got two people wanting to give comment, Mark. Tracy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Ms. Thomas, was that in relation to 1-2, and then Mr. Benton? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to point out that James had his hand raised to you.
Oh, I understand. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Benton, please.
Oh, okay. I had a question. You said the Secretary of State was going to notify the people that hadn't filed.
Yes, sir. So this regulation relates to campaign finance and the requirements for candidates to file contribution and expense reports. There's a series of reports that need to be filed as a candidate quarterly, as well as an annual report. In statute, it actually identifies very specifically what the penalty fees are, when the timelines are. Candidates actually have to sign an acknowledgement of this before as they're part of their candidate filing process. And while there is a waiver process, the question has come up in the past about notifications and reminders, and an individual that didn't get a reminder may have said once, "You didn't remind me. Why? How are you fining me for this when it's just in the statutes?" And then I signed something. So this regulation simply clarifies that without a reminder, the individuals are still responsible for fulfilling their statutory responsibilities.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, sir. That question wasn't, again, really was just for clarification, but just to clarify for the record, again, proposed regulation LCB file number R082-21P is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. At this time, I will open the adoption hearing on proposed regulation R083-21P. R083-21P, for those reading along, is on page 39 of the document. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to the recall of public officers. Existing law requires a notice of intent to circulate a petition to recall a public officer to be signed by 3 registered voters who, 1, voted in the state, county, district, or municipal election at which the public officer was elected, and 2, reside in the jurisdiction represented by the public officer. The Nevada Constitution requires that a petition to recall a public officer contain not less than 25% of the number of persons who actually voted in the state, county, district, or municipality represented by the public officer at the election in which the public officer was elected. Moreover, existing law requires that the signatures on the petition be verified in accordance with specified statutory guidelines. This regulation provides that a petition to recall a public officer may be withdrawn if, 1, at least 2 of the registered voters who signed the notice of intent submit a notice of withdrawal to the filing officer on a form prescribed by the Secretary of State, and 2, the notice of withdrawal is received by the filing officer before the petition is submitted to the filing officer for signature verification. This regulation further provides that once a petition to recall a public officer is withdrawn, no further action may be taken on that petition. Finally, this regulation requires that not less than 24 hours after receiving a notice of withdrawal, the filing officer to notify the Secretary of State, the public officer who is the subject of the recall, and if only 2 of the registered voters who signed the notice of intent submitted the notice of intent withdrawal, the 3rd registered voter who signed the notice of intent. Again, this is strictly relating to clarifying already in practice statutes relating to the recall of public officers. The notice of intent, to clarify, is already a public document, and when individuals submit a notice of intent that has the areas for 3 individuals to fill their names out, again, that is a public record. This is simply to clarify the procedures for withdrawing, so that if out of 3 people, if 1 chooses to withdraw, it is not, again, withdrawn without at least 2 of the 3 individuals. Though there are situations where, again, 1 individual provides a notice of intent depending on the nature of the petition. So that's the intent of this regulation. Looking at the public comment, again, there was some, but not too much relating to it. And there were no changes to the text of proposed regulation R083-21P. At this time, I will open public comment relating to proposed regulation R083-21P, though, in case anybody is interested in making comment now. Mr. Parks, please.
Thank you, Mark. For the record, Bruce Parks, Chairman, Washoe County Republican Party. I have a lot of experience with the recall process, and there was discussion at the last workshop that what this does in effect is puts a target on the back of the people that signed the letter of intent, and that situation has not changed. I am adamantly opposed to any language that would encourage people to try to influence the signers of the letter of intent to withdraw their name from it. And that's exactly what changing this regulation in this manner does. Now, anybody can withdraw their name at any time should they choose to, but codifying this language absolutely puts a target on those people that signed that letter of intent. Despite any rhetoric to the contrary, that is the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parks, for your comment. Yes, sir. Please.
I'm just a little bit lost in the process here. When it says the public officer contained not less than 25% of the number of persons who actually voted, is that up to discussion, or that's already in the legislation and there's nothing we can do about that?
Yes, sir. That's already in the law. This is just, again, about the withdrawal procedures. And really to prevent, again, if right now, if 3 people submit a notice of intent, previously 1 person could have attempted to withdraw it without necessarily the involvement of the other 2. This is really trying to protect that process, and so that at least a majority of the 3 individuals involved. But yes, sir, in regards to the percentage, those are all defined in law.
Okay, and I'm just a little curious why there's no reaction to the comment just brought. I'm sorry, I forget the name of the gentleman, but he seems to have more experience than I do by far, and he's very concerned. So can you reply or give your comment on the situation of putting pressure on a person to remove their name?
Yes, sir. So again, the intent here is actually to protect the individuals providing, that have submitted the notice of intent. Again, protect, but protect the process, so that one individual who is targeted as an individual and attempts to stop the notice of intent and stop the process. Previously that may have been possible. Now it requires 2 out of 3. And while I understand Mr. Park's concerns, I don't know if this really alters that. I think the withdrawal process, with 3 people's names on it, could they be targeted as is? I certainly hope not. Like that, it kind of is counter to the process entirely. Does this put more pressure on one individual or another? I don't have any information that would suggest that would happen. But I understand his concerns, and it's certainly something that we're going to keep a close eye on. And if, again, like I said, this is not a one-time regulatory process. Following the 2022 election cycle, we're going to re-examine our lessons learned. We'll look at what comes out of the 2023 legislative session, and then we'll have a very similar regulation updates. And if need be, if we get feedback that there has been a concern, then we'll certainly discuss and find other ways to address that issue.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. We had 3 people. They say, yeah, I want to recall this not candidate, this officer, or whatever the title is, right? I want to recall the governor, I want to recall the county clerk, whatever it is. Those 3 people sign, and then for whatever reason, somebody puts pressure from one side or the other side and says, hey, how could you do this? You know, blah, 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 blah. And he or she says, okay, well, I take my name off. In today's world, if that happens, that means the whole recall stops.
There's the possibility for that, right? And again, to clarify that right now, if one person pulled it off or attempted to withdraw it, again, by having it clarified that you need, if there's 3 people on there, you do need at least 2.
Okay,
yes,
so
sir.
that's what this is saying. 1 is not enough. You would need 2 then to say, no, okay. So it seems to me that that's even stronger to avoid pressure from outside sources than it is today.
That was part of the intent, yes, sir. But again, Mr. Park's concerns are valid, and we'll certainly keep a close eye to make sure that the intent isn't missed in execution.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. Was this proposed regulation written based on new legislation recently passed?
No, ma'am. This proposed regulation was developed following the 2020 election cycle. There were a number of discussions about recall attempts throughout really 2021. And this was a concern that came up from individuals and some of the clerks that we identified, just given the large number of discussed recall attempts.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right, thank you for allowing me to take those notes real quick. At this time, Ms. White, do you have another question?
No, sorry, thank you.
Sorry, okay. Make sure I don't miss anybody. At this time, is there anybody else that is interested in providing public comment relating to proposed regulation R083-21? Okay, seeing no more public comment relating to proposed regulation proposed regulation R083-21. Public comment is closed. Proposed regulation LCB file number R083-21 is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. At this time, I will open the adoption hearing for proposed regulation R084-21. Proposed regulation R084-21 begins on page 43 of 64 for those following along. Existing law authorizes the Secretary of State to adopt regulations relating to campaign practices and recall elections. Existing law requires a committee for the recall of a public officer to register with the Secretary of State. Existing law defines committee for the recall of a public officer as an organization that 1, receives any contributions, makes any contribution to candidates or persons, or makes any expenditures that are designed to affect the recall of a public officer, or 2, files a notice of intent to circulate a petition for the recall of a public officer. Section 1 of this regulation establishes a deadline for the registration of any such committee by requiring the committee to register with the Secretary of State not later than 10 days after filing the notice of intent. Existing law provides that before a petition for the recall of a public officer is circulated, the persons proposing to circulate the petition must file a notice of intent to circulate the petition. Section 2 of this regulation requires a copy of a proposed petition to recall a public officer to be filed with the Secretary of State on the same date the notice of intent is filed with the filing officer. Further, Section 2 prohibits the proposed petition from being circulated until both the notice of intent and a copy of the proposed petition are filed. The Nevada Constitution and existing law set forth various requirements relating to the contents of a petition to recall a public officer, including without limitation, the requirement that the petition contain a description not exceeding 200 words of the reasons why the recall is demanded. Section 2 requires that the copy of the proposed petition filed with the Secretary of State meet such constitutional and statutory requirements. Sections 3 to 5 of this regulation update various internal references in order to conform with existing provisions of the Nevada Revised Statutes. Again, there was a little but not much public comment relating to this regulation. Again, based on the public comment we received in writing since the workshop and during, there are no changes though to the proposed text of proposed regulation R084-21. At this time though, I will open public comment relating to proposed regulation R084-21. If you're interested in making public comment, please go ahead and indicate so now. Mr. Parks, please.
Thank you, Mark. Again, Bruce Parks, Chairman, Washoe County Republican Party. This particular change to regulation is not onerous. Onerous, and it does actually help the Secretary of State better oversee, if you will, the whole process of recalling an individual. It doesn't really change any of the requirements according to the recall guide that the Secretary of State currently issues to anybody that is interested in doing a recall, and they were very cooperative with us in that regard. And I would further say that I believe, in my humble opinion, that it is the Secretary of State's responsibility to make sure that the language of the recall complies with state statute. They definitely have that responsibility, and this actually puts it, well, it codifies it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. At this time, is there anybody else interested in making public comment relating to proposed regulation R084-21P? Okay, give it a second to make sure, but not seeing anyone else who wishes to speak, I will close public comment on proposed regulation R084-21P. Proposed regulation R084-21P is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. I will now open the adoption hearing on proposed regulation R110-21P. For those following along with the text, this is on page 49. Existing law requires the Secretary of State to adopt regulations for conducting a risk limiting audit of an election. Existing law also requires the Secretary of State to develop a pilot program for conducting a risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election. And 2, authorizes the Secretary of State to require each county clerk to participate in the pilot program and conduct a risk limiting audit. This regulation 1 requires that certain county clerks conduct a risk limiting audit of the 2022 primary election. 2 requires that all county clerks conduct a risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election. And 3 sets forth certain requirements, that apply to any risk limiting audit conducted of the 2022 primary election or 2022 general election. We received a lot of public comment in regards to this proposed regulation as well, that I would like to address right now. To be clear, this is something I do want to highlight before we turn over to public comment. We are still currently conducting pilot risk limiting audits, or in other words, these are our test runs. We did this during not only the 2020 cycle, but also every single election that occurred during 2021, which there were quite a few actually in Boulder City, in Elko, in Esmeralda, and elsewhere. All of these, again, were test opportunities for the county and city clerks to conduct these risk limiting audits. And that's a deliberate part of this process. risk limiting audits, actually back up, section 37.7 of Assembly Bill 422. One, requires the Secretary of State to develop a pilot program for conducting these risk limiting audits. And two, authorizes, again, the Secretary of State to require the county clerks to participate in them. But this is something that frankly, they're all on board with and wanted to do as well. Risk limiting audits, again, every opportunity to confirm the validity of our electoral process is one that our clerks and registrars embrace fully. So these tests that we've done, even the most recent one that we did in Elko County, for example, while the risk limiting audit was conducted after that special election, a great number, I think it was close to maybe 8 to 12 of the other clerks and registrars or member of their staffs participated virtually in watching and discussing these audits to help better increase their understanding and so that we can each apply and learn from each other to make those lessons learned applicable as we get ready for the primary and then the general election in 22. These excuse me. So based on the public comment that we received, and keeping in mind that these are pilots, these are tests, again, deliberately intended to identify best practices and to clarify required changes, which there have been numerous. For example, some of the clerks have identified that even something as simple as how you organize the ballots for storage is important in the conduct of a risk limiting audit. These risk limiting audits, again, use statistical methods to identify random ballots that are then retrieved and compared to. And so knowing how to get to a certain ballot box to draw that specific ballot, again, you can see how the organization and that the labeling systems in some cases become extremely important to make this a timely process. So as we move forward, we are going to amend the text of this regulation to add effective January 1, 2024, within 15 days following completion of the risk limiting audit conducted pursuant to NRS 293.394, the county clerk shall remit to the Secretary of State the results of such audit, and the Secretary of State shall, within 10 days of receiving such information from the county clerk, post the results of all audits on the Secretary of State's website. And that was something that the Secretary eagerly embraced. The idea of increased transparency is very important to her. And that, again, was something that she wanted to include based on the feedback we received. As for public observation, absolutely, starting again, once these are no longer pilots and tests, we absolutely are going to include regulations that address, what exactly does it mean for public observation? Again, your clerks and registrars want the public to be involved and to observe these processes, especially something like risk limiting audits. If you're interested, please reach out to our public information officer, and we can provide some summary descriptions and references to explain the risk limiting audit process and how statistics are used and what exactly they're achieving. But certainly, again, going forward, we want the public to be aware of and involved in these processes to help increase, again, voter confidence, which I think is something that we all recognize we want to address. So the public, in regards to public observation, again, future regulations are going to address that as we approach the 2024 deadline to end pilot programs and to begin risk limiting audits in full. At this time, though, I will open public comment regarding proposed regulation R110-21. If you are interested in making a public comment on proposed regulation R110-21, please go ahead and indicate in Zoom now. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. Can you please put in the link where we can find the language that defines the purpose and product of the risk limiting audit? If you could put that in the chat, that would be great, so we can go back and really read it. And then will these risk limiting audits be used in the 2022 primary and general as a pilot? And where can we see the results? Are we going to be able to see, could we observe that, the pilots? Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. So there's a number of resources. If it's all right with you, I'll provide our public information officer's email. That way she can compile all the different documents and references. It is in statute that we are required to do it. And I can put that in the chat. It's a very small statute. I think it may not answer the questions that you're looking for, though. But those other documents I can provide to our PIO, and she'll be able to distribute to everybody. In regards to 2022, yes, again, the clerks have eagerly embraced doing risk limiting audits, even these pilots. And have again been learning and watching from each other. They are required to do a pilot in 22 for both the primary as well as the general. It's the process right now, again, is something that is still under consideration because there are differences in how you do a risk limiting audit depending on the types of systems that you're using. There's also continuing discussion about the scope of a risk limiting audit and how many specific races on the ballot you would do, and the percentages as well. I found out in doing my research leading up to the development of this regulation that a lot of states actually started their risk limiting audits at like a 10 to 15% risk limiting audit to kind of figure out the system. And really what that percentage relates to is the number of ballots selected. And then as they get better at it, they kind of narrow down their scope with the average at the end of it really ending up around 3 to 5%. So we are starting at 5% right now, but with an intent to possibly consider moving lower. In regards to the public observation, it's something that we've discussed and may likely become something that is possible to view. During the 2022 election cycle, there's a little concern, of course, that what we do in the primary may be different from what we do in the general as we continue to do these tests pilots specifically to get a feel for how much work is required. Are the resources there? Do we still need to adjust and move and reorganize and those sorts of things across the state? When it comes to the county level resources. So it's something that we've taken into consideration, but I don't believe that there's been a determination just yet for statewide guidance. Though again, I do know that I suspect if you reach out to your county clerks and ask to observe, I believe they would likely agree to it unless there was some other sort of circumstances possibly preventing that.
Okay, and did you, when you were developing the risk limiting audit process, did you reach out to any state for their extant process? And if so, which state?
Yes, ma'am. So the risk limiting audits are still a relatively new thing. In fact, in many regards, there's a number of national advocates. I don't have the exact list in front of me. It's one of those topics, though, that as more and more states are doing, more and more states have the ability to discuss. And again, we discuss back and forth best practices. Specifically, those states that I talked to, Colorado has been doing this for a while. They had some interesting ideas. Again, right, just points of view from other states, not something that we just simply copied and pasted. We're very careful to make sure that it applies to our specific situation in electorate.
And are you did you address states that have similarities to Nevada?
Oh, of course. The ones that do, again, I don't have a full list of the states.
Was California one of them?
I don't know if California does risk limiting audits or not, or I think maybe they've started after we have.
I think they do, but that doesn't matter.
Oh, well, here, I'll tell you what, I will put this into the chat. Oh, and you're right, there is a list of states that on this page here that talks a little bit about risk limiting audits, what they do, and some of the statutory requirements. You can see it highlights that we have a pilot program on that page. That's the National Conference of State Legislatures webpage, a very reliable, nonpartisan source of information that I pulled up real quick when it comes to RLAs. So you can see, again, not as many states have them yet, but I do know a number of other states are discussing moving forward on them. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Camp, good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Mark Kampf, candidate for Nye County Clerk, Republican. Two things. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, that for now, until the 2024 election, these will continue to be pilot programs. So under the Legislative Council Digest, where it says this regulation requires a risk limiting audit of the 2022 primary election, that will be a pilot program, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then number two, one of the recommendations that I had made in the previous Zoom meeting was that this be expanded to include a canvas of some of the votes. I assume that was rejected.
So risk limiting audits are different from canvasses in recounts. And as there are statutes that relate directly to those, that's something that wouldn't have fallen in the scope of this. In regards to the much broader discussion about recounts, hand recounts, and other canvas type procedures, those are ongoing as well. But really a lot of those end up coming either into conflict with existing statutes or would require a change in statute to implement appropriately. But again, those conversations are not done. They are ongoing, and we're still continuing across the state with our discussions with the clerks and registrars to find new and different ways to reassure voters that their ballots were cast appropriately.
Very good. Just for those on the call, if you do want those sorts of audits at this point in time, you can petition your Board of County Commissioners or your local government leaders, and they can authorize such types of audits. So we're not, we can't do it through the clerk's process or through the Secretary of State process, but it can be done through the local government process. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, sir. I do see one question in the chat from Miss Pamela Etlin, specifically regarding the pilots. Her question is, have risk limiting audits never been implemented before? So they are relatively new in the state. They only became part of the statutes during the 2019 legislative session. Excuse me. And even again, thinking about risk limiting audits in general, I believe it was only a concept developed around 2010 or so. So they are relatively new. And again, the intent behind the pilots is to identify the processes and procedures so that we can ultimately put them into regulation and to make sure that these are done in a timely manner. They can be really, really time intensive, which is one of the first things we figured out by doing these pilot programs. I think one of the first ones took upwards of like 5 or 6 days to kind of go through the process, understand how it was supposed to work, find the ballots appropriately, and to check everything. And ultimately, the goal is to do this, at least initially, prior to the certification at the county level, which, as you know, is a requirement to be done on or before the 10th day following the election. So when you think about mail ballots continue to come in up to 4 days after. Signature curing can go up to 2 days after. The clerks and registrars are drafting documents to provide to their Board of Supervisors or Board of County Commissioners as appropriate. All the while, again, also looking at provisional ballots to make sure those are compared across the state. And this is, and by that point, maybe a month or so after a series of uninterrupted 12-hour days. Also to now add in risk limiting audits to confirm, very valuable. And again, no one's arguing that it's not valuable at all and an extremely important and useful process. But the goal is to make sure that we identify and find these ways to implement it properly, so that we're not, again, adding to the already voluminous requirements for the clerks and registrars. Because like I think all of you have highlighted, we've talked about in every one of these workshops, it's come up. The importance isn't speed. The importance is accuracy and following the statutes and requirements that our clerks and registrars have at the county level and the state for that matter. Ms. Reyes, good morning, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate that. I just have problems with this because it's, for me, I look at it, any certified voter requesting an audit of an outside credited audited team. And of course, the wording appropriately added, because as I read this, it seems in-house control, complete control. Certain county clerks get to conduct a risk limiting audit of the 2022 primary election. Who determines which certain county clerks? And then I understand requires that all county clerks conduct at-risk limiting audit of the 2022 general election. Again, the county clerks get to determine the risk limiting. Who's doing the risk limiting audit? What is the parameters of that audit? Are they from an outside source accredited? And again, it's to me, when I read this, and I do apologize, it's the hen counting the chickens and telling me how many hens are still left in the chicken house. So it just, I do apologize, and I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm just against putting this in. I'm all for audits, but not letting the fox have control of how many chickens are in the hen house because he's counting them. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And when I provide that information to our PIO for distribution, you'll see that I guess the big question is like, what is being audited? I think is an important thing to focus on as well. In these cases, it's the voting systems that are under the audit and not the clerks themselves. Specifically, it's ensuring that whether it's the tally or the margins are confirmed as being what's recorded. But yes, ma'am, I understand your concerns and I've made notes about how we could address that. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. So I think the confusion is coming from the use of the word audit. Audit, most people think, is a confirmation that the ballots were counted properly. In this case, I believe the RLA is solely addressing the operation of the machinery and the software. It is not confirming the accuracy of the tabulation. It's just checking to see if the machine's taking whatever ballots come in and it's spitting them out with basic information. It's the operation of the machine, not really the accuracy of the count. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. At this time, is there any other, Ms. Reyes?
I understand about an audit, but when I place a vote in a machine and I can't see the end result of who they put down when I press that lever, the end result, that bothers me. And an audit should say, Kathy voted for Mr. Smith. Kathy voted for Mr. Jones. Kathy voted for Miss Smith. And that should do it. But when I go in there, I cannot see who I voted for. That I have issues with. So going back to the audit, when the hen is counting the chickens and telling me how many chickens are in the hen house, I've got to take his word for it. I've got to believe that you put down Miss Smith or Mr. Jones for me, and there's no way to prove that. So I do have issues, which is bigger than just that simple audit. But if 50 people came in and 50 people left, but 50 people didn't vote for the same person, but that the audit determines that Mr. Smith won with 50 votes, there's no way for me to prove that. There's no way for me to get that. And again, going back to the county clerk gets to determine the at-risk audit. So it's limited. I'm sorry, I just am against that limited audit, and it should be from an outside source at the bequest of any eligible verified voter. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Benton, please. I'm sorry, sir, you're still on mute.
Sorry, thank you. That there was an election quite a few years ago, and they did an audit, and they used the paper rolls that contain the votes. But what they did, they would roll the vote, scan it, one person, check, see if the information was the same, but they didn't count up like all the votes on the roll and compare it to the value that the machine put out. So I think that this would be something to consider doing, at least on a random basis, to check the machines and the paper data.
Yes, sir. I appreciate your comments, and I will let you know again that the discussion regarding audits, in general, is also very intense and ongoing. Across the country, election officials are very carefully scrutinizing existing audits, as well as looking at it for ways to find new ones. And a lot of the discussions and points that have been brought up, again, are very much under discussion as well. But I do appreciate your comments. Thank you. Ms. Reyes and Ms. White, do you both have another comment? Or?
I still do, yeah.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Ms. White, please.
Maybe it could be included in here that the manufacturer personnel should not be involved in the audit at all. I mean, I know that like in our case, Dominion personnel are at where the counting is happening. And so they should not be involved in the audit. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. At this time, is there? Let's see.
Yes,
Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Moore, please.
thank you. Yeah, I have to say that I almost feel like this whole section should not be put up right now, because it seems like we all are more concerned about what this actually means, without going through the result of all the studies that you say are being done for an audit. Like when I read this, I say, well, we're not talking about canvassing. That's something else. That's a different study. We're not talking about the actual count. Well, that's something else. We're talking about, testing for another 18 months to see about a sampling, using the word audit, where that's confusing in itself. I find either I'm way out of this thing completely, or it's premature. What is it actually going to give us? What we want to know as citizens who vote, we want to know that no outside sources are manipulating either machines or processes or counting. We want to know that only legal, legitimate, registered voters actually cast ballots. And I don't see how this solves my worries of illegal and fraudulent voting.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. To be clear, in that regard, I think you're right. Like this is an RLA is a process, is an additional process, but it is not intended to address those concerns. I view it as another tool in the toolbox to overall review as part of a post-election review to make sure that things are occurring the way they need to be. But you're right. This isn't an end-all be-all for one solution or another. But merely an additional tool to help, again, ensure the accuracy of our process. In regards to these regulations, part of our intent in drafting these and providing them, though, was increased transparency. We want the public to be aware that we are discussing these and to include terms in here, right? Like you could see on page, the bottom of page 51 and 52, talking about the different types. Very deliberate in the definitions, so that as we move forward in these pilots, the public are able to look at what a ballot comparison in RLA means and understand that, so that to help better inform you, so that your public comment and guidance, either through future regulatory processes or in discussions with your representatives, could be better informed about what is happening here in the state. But I do understand your concerns, and I will let you know that this regulation, rather this portion of the administrative codes, will come up in future regulation hearings, as following the 2022 election cycle, as we continue to refine and improve the process and explain that to the public, so that everyone knows what we're doing.
Let me just follow up on that. First of all, I want to thank you and your team and everybody else who does anything to give us the transparency and try to prevent any fraud. So I'm certainly not attacking that, and I thank you. What I think can be a danger, we heard after 2020, so many of the propagandists saying, oh, but we've done audits, and it's just conspiracy that there was fraud. It's audit after audit. It proves that the safest election in the history of the world. And this scares me, because this will be, well, Nevada did an audit. They did many audits, and it will be misconstrued as an audit. It's really not what we would want to be perceived as. We guarantee that only legal votes counted, and we guarantee that these votes were counted properly. We guarantee that the machines did not manipulate any of the results. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I kind of hear this from everybody.
Yes, sir. I understand and appreciate your comments in that regard as well. Pleased but not satisfied is a phrase that comes up a lot in our discussions about all post-election reviews and audits. Again, that's part of the reason why we continue to look for new innovative ways to review. And certainly, again, that is a topic of discussion far more than, well, maybe as much as you'd want it to be, because it certainly is, both here in the Elections Division with the Secretary of State, as well as in our discussions with the clerks. Again, please don't understand that this RLA process is the end all. It's not the finish line by any stretch of the imagination. And I suspect there will be more discussions going forward about other ways that we can achieve or maybe move closer to what exactly you're describing.
Thank you.
Sure. Ms. Martinez, please.
Yes, thank you, Mark. For the record, again, Cindy Martinez, Washoe County Republican Party Vice Chair. I understand that the scope of this workshop is for the regulations, but I think also this affords us, we the people, an opportunity to exercise our First Amendment rights and petition our government for a redress of grievance. What I experienced through this process in January, this and also having been a veteran of a state agency, is what's become crystal clear to me and many people that I've talked to, is that we are captives of an absolutely burdensome, bureaucratic, administrative state. And despite your assurances that you're working on transparency, you in the general sense, the Secretary of State's office, I still remain skeptical and gravely concerned about the security of our election going into 2022. Ultimately, it's going to be our responsibility to elect representatives who have the Constitution at the forefront of their mind and a commitment to ensure the sanctity and protection of our votes. But here again, we're in the conundrum of we're working towards getting people to accurately represent our interest and protection of our votes. And we're at the mercy of a system that we don't trust. So I would, those of you who are in Washoe County, please put on your calendar for February 8th. We need you at the County Commission. But still, this is our opportunity for redress of grievance, and that needs to be expressed to Secretary of State Sagaski. She was held responsible for not responding to our reasonable concerns after the election, and we continue to press our points, and we want our elections trued up and protected. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. I will reassure you as well that within minutes of conclusion of our meetings, workshops, adoption hearings, and everything, I talk to the Secretary and I provide a very detailed feedback that you all are providing to me to make sure that she is keenly aware of that. So yes, ma'am, and I will continue to do so and express your concerns. Ms. White, please.
I think I heard you say at the beginning that you maintained the 5% level. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
For the pilot programs. Yes.
Yeah, there are several people who are asking for less, 1% or even 0.5%. But so should the audit give 6%, what is the sequence of events that would then happen? Would they do another risk limiting audit until they get the results they want, or what happens? Does it lead to a recount, a paper ballot recount, or what?
Yes, ma'am. So again, the RLA process, it actually, as you're going through it and you identify the number of ballots that have to be pulled to be reviewed, if there's a question or discrepancy, you continue to pull ballots to confirm if that issue is prevalent. And then again, that ultimately could result in a full recount, based on how that process is working out. So yes, exactly like you said, if we say we're aiming for this percentage, and this is really kind of the realm that we're looking at, if it's anything outside, we're going to narrow it. And typically we found that even when we say we're doing a 5% risk limiting audit, we end up really doing closer to like a 4 based on the numbers that we get and as we kind of work through the process. But this is something certainly that as part of this pilot program, you can imagine we're developing not just internal procedures and discussions, but also very much thinking externally. How can we help inform the public about what an RLA is? What's its intent and focus? So that as we get closer to the requirement to start doing them in January of 2024 going forward, that again, it's not just comfort that the clerks and registrars understand how to do these, but so that we can explain it and have the documents that we can provide, and an entire website set up to explain how we do them here in Nevada, not what other states are doing, or not some national level summary, but specifics to here. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you say additional ballots, you'll take the 5% and then say that fails, then you'll discard or eliminate those first 5% from the next risk limiting audit. You'll gather another 5%, you'll do another, how many ballots are actually you gonna scan to get the 5%?
So it's actually not 5% of all the ballots cast that we're referring to, and that percentage.
Right.
But you're right, and it's interesting. It depends on the nature of the election. When you have a pick 2 or pick 3 type election, you actually have significantly more ballots that are pulled for review than if you have a wide margin between 2 individuals. So again, I think it probably would be best if I could provide some documentation to you that explains kind of where we're at so far in our review and understanding of the RLA process. That I think might help more clearly explain it, if that's possible.
Well, that would be great for me, but I think other people on this call might be interested in that too. Is it something that you could put into the chat? And what I heard you say is that basically the number of ballots that are actually scanned varies by race and by election.
A number of factors, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It has been as small as well, it depends on the scope of the election, right? If there's only
Right.
Right. I'll tell you what, if it's possible, I think this is actually a good cue for me. I have, as soon as we're done with this adoption hearing, and I won't take a break just yet, but as soon as we're done with the adoption hearing and we close this one out, we will take a break. And during that break, I will find some documents that I can provide into the chat for you that go into a little bit more detail. So that way everybody has access to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. At this time, is there any other public comment? Ms. White, do you have something else? Or okay, sorry, just want to make sure. At this time, is there any other proposed public comment regarding the proposed regulation R110-21? R110-21. Okay, seeing no more public comment. Proposed regulation in LCD file number R110-21 is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. Prior to starting our adoption hearing on proposed regulation R111-21, I would like to take a quick break. I see it's 10:02 now. We will adjourn for 13 minutes and we will resume promptly at 10:15. So I'll put into the chat, we'll be back at 10:15 so that anybody that joins is aware of what's going on. But otherwise, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in a few moments.
Being able to.
We were told both the president and vice president were in a situation where during the entire race.
No, no. I
Also, mute your microphone, please.
Jennifer Griffin for us with the latest from the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Senator, indeed.
Okay, I have 10:15. We can go ahead and resume. I do want to highlight that I put two links along with a quick description into the chat for everyone's awareness. The first is a link to the statute relating to risk limiting audits, specifically 293 NRS 293, 394. Then second, I've added in a link to a document. It's a 2018 document from the Election Assistance Commission. It's a federal agency that describes, risk limiting audits, provide some descriptions of background on the process, what they are, the different types, the methods that you'll notice. Again, we included some description about that as well in these proposed regulations, or in that adopted regulation rather now. And there's even at the bottom, I haven't checked recently to see if like the little the tool, like a demo tool, so you can kind of see what that looks like. But again, I think those are solid starting points. And then as we go forward, we've talked about, again, everything from adding an entire audit section in all senses of the audit word to the elections procedure manual that's under development as well. And certainly continuing our discussion about audits writ large and how we can, again, examine the ones that we're doing. Are we doing them right? Do we need to do more? What type are there? How can we get to, again, finding different ways to increase voter confidence based on our compliance with the laws. So that being said, let me jump back into the script real quick. Okay, this time I would like to open the adoption hearing for proposed regulation with the LCB file number R111-21P. For those of you reading along on the 64-page PDF that was provided along with the notice, this is page 55, please, 55. Proposed regulation R111-21P. Existing law authorizes the Board of County Commissioners of any county to purchase and adopt for use at elections any mechanical voting system and mechanical recording device. And that's NRS 293B.105. The mechanical voting system is a system of voting whereby a voter may cast a vote, one, on a device which mechanically or electronically compiles a total of the number of votes cast for each candidate, and for or against each measure voted on, or two, by marking a paper ballot which is subsequently counted on an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. Existing regulations require the county clerk in a county using a mechanical voting device to conduct certain tests before and after each election to ensure that each mechanical recording device, which directly records votes electronically, will accurately record the votes cast for all offices and on all measures. Section 2 of this regulation requires that the county clerk also test each ballot marking device, which is defined in Section 1 of this regulation as a device that allows a registered voter to mark a paper ballot, which is subsequently counted on an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. Existing regulations require that before each election cycle for federal office, each county clerk is required to certify that the operating systems installed on each mechanical recording device have been certified by the Voting System Certification and Laboratory Accreditation Program of the Election Assistance Committee. Section 3 of this regulation, 1, updates the name of the program and relevant citation in federal law, and 2, requires the county clerk to also certify the operating systems installed on each ballot marking device. Section 3 further requires those certifications to be done before each election. So there were a couple, there's again, significant feedback regarding proposed regulation, LCB file number R111-21P that I do want to clarify and explain what we are going to adopt as well. The testing that does occur in advance of the start of early voting. This is something that, again, the timeline had been left relatively vague. It said before the election. So there were, again, it could have been done as far as the month of January, all the way up to the week before. And to be clear, what we've noticed in the past is if there is any issue at all with the machines, with a specific machine, maybe the power doesn't turn on and the power cable is broken or something along those lines, the machines are simply not used. So again, as you can imagine, from both a state and county perspective, because of the importance of accuracy, as well as complying with laws and making sure there's no question relating to this entire process. If there's a question with a machine, then that machine is not used during that election. However, the recommended amendment to have it completed, to have these tests completed not later than 1 week before the election is appropriate, and the secretary accepted it. So therefore, we will amend the text to read, quote, not earlier than 5 weeks before and not later than 1 week before the first day of early voting. That more clearly defines the window of time in which the testing is allowed to occur. The recommendation to also add, and within 10 days after each election is not accepted, in part because NAC 293.255, subsection 5, that's NAC 293.255, subsection 5, already requires a post-election certification audit for the VVPATs to be completed within 7 working days, which 7 working days after election, plus the 2 days for the holiday, or the weekend rather, actually puts you right at 9 days anyway. So we anticipating drafting a future regulation that also requires the same timeline for ballot marking devices going forward. That being said, at this time, I will open public comment relating to proposed regulation R111-21. If you are interested in making public comment on this proposed regulation, please go ahead and indicate now. Mr. Parks, please.
Thank you, Mark. Again, Bruce Parks, Chairman, Washoe County Republican Party.
Mr. Parks, you're coming in faint but readable. Is it possible to?
Stand by. How about now?
Same. Is that just me? Is anybody else able to hear him all right? You can hear? Okay, I'll adjust my volume. I'm sorry. I'll crank it up.
This any better, Mark?
It is. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bruce Parks, Chairman, Washoe County Republican Party. I'm not sure how you can audit a machine that has proprietary software that you're not able to access. We already have proof that there's an algorithm built in to the software that the machines use that is used to adjust the percentage of votes cast for particular candidates. While you may conduct somewhat of an audit, you cannot audit the machines completely because we don't have, and nobody does, except for the creators of the software, total access to all the code that was used to create the software. And until you or anybody else has complete access to all the software, there's no way you can properly audit any of these machines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. When you say 5 weeks before, up to 1 week before that, is there any language in here that states that this is no patches will be allowed to be made to the software during that time or after that week before? Essentially, so it's 6 weeks before, no patches can be made. Is there any language in there for that?
Ma'am, in regards to the timelines for modifications to the machines, not in this regulation. In part, again, a quick review tells me that there are other regulations and statutes that talk about that timeline. This is something that when it comes to the voting machines, as patches become identified, the process is this. And actually, I witnessed this firsthand myself about 2 or 3 months ago. There was a minor patch to a certain type of machine. That frankly, like one of the 3 things that it did, it was added a different font that somebody had asked to be incorporated into the voting system for use on the screen to better help voters. They don't just send a patch and then you apply it. They have to apply to the EAC to show that the patch is meets the requirements, doesn't violate any of the EAC's federal requirements or guidelines. The companies that do this test it in-house first to make sure that it meets the requirements, then ask the EAC for certification. The EAC gets involved. They scrutinize every aspect to make sure that by adding this one font or making any sort of slight change to the program, that nothing else is altered. If it's a hardware change, there's an extensive scrutiny of that entire system as well to make sure that, again, whatever is being added or removed or modified in any stretch at all is tightly monitored and controlled and reviewed for approval. Once the EAC has confirmed that, yes, this is merely adding Helvetica or whatever font to the system or whatever other sort of changes, they will approve it, again, after some fairly intense scrutiny. Then it comes to the state level for our certification that we talked about briefly with the Gaming Control Board. And then it goes to the county level for yet another level of scrutiny. And these are the tests that this regulation relates to directly. These tests that are conducted, again, are tests of how the machine records information. So these are done in a number of different ways too. Everything from, the machine is supposed to record and indicate certain things if a race is left blank, which is indicated by an undervote. It's supposed to identify if a race has, if it's a pick 2, but then the individual picked 3. It's the screen needs to be able to show that. There's tests that relate to where on the screen did you touch to confirm that it's calibrated, based on either the touch screen. That there's one where you crumple up a ballot, before or somehow for those machines that have those the ballots that you put into them, to see at what point does it cause a jam, or does the machine still read it, or does it not read it because if you fold it or try to do something to the ballot, does it then allow it to go through incorrectly? So these are the tests that we're talking about before and after to make sure that, yes, by this point in the process, this is not the clerk sitting down, pulling up the SQL databases, reading through the code. This is like all of that has happened at the federal and the state levels beforehand. By this point, this is a confirmation. The machine records data, the ballots that are being cast as indicated by voters.
Okay, so I'm just curious, are you a computer person? I know you have an IT person on your team. Does that person have deep experience and knowledge of the verification of the source code that is used?
Nobody on my team has that level of understanding of the source code. No, ma'am.
Okay.
The source code, yeah.
Okay, so then can language be included someplace that requires a Secretary of State to release the names of the vendors who are actually doing the verification of the source code? Or is that a county thing? But can we include language in there? Because we need to know who is actually doing the certification of this, because I'm sure Secretary of State Zagafsky is not a techie either. She couldn't do it, but she's relying on the expertise of others and outside vendors likely. And so those outside vendors should be public information, not just according to EAC program. So it would be nice to have it included in there that somewhere the vendors who are doing that is released.
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, again, at the EAC level, the federal level, there's a very strict limit on who those individuals, the voting system test laboratories are. In fact, if I recall, there's only 2, and they are public. We don't use either of those 2 vendors, except I'm not frankly sure where the 2 vendors are based. I mean, it's somewhere in the United States, of course, but not, I don't believe they're Nevadan companies. But
I think you do. I think you do.
Gaming Control Board.
And they contract to other entities. Because
yes,
I saw the contract that the gaming board signed with the state of Nevada, and they said it was a $320,000 contract for 4 years. And they estimated it was 80 hours per year. There's no way you could do all the source code checking that you need to in 80 hours. And I've gotten this from big techies, that you could not do that. It would take several weeks. So I was hoping that you could release the names of the vendors who are actually doing the certification or verification of the source code.
Ma'am, if it's not the Gaming Control Board, then and if they outsource it, then I don't have that information. But again, that unfortunately is a little bit outside the scope of this regulation. I understand your concerns though, and again, but we aren't the custodians of that information, unfortunately, if Gaming Control Board does outsource that.
But see, that's the problem, that voters and citizens are being told that, yeah, we're certifying that this source code is legit. And then I don't know if it's even in these regulations or in NRS that's stating that the gaming board is doing it. So we don't know. We're just being told, oh, EAC said we're checking it with good companies. Well, how do we know? Tell us the name of the company so we can be assured that they're good people, that they have the tech skills and no connections, affiliations that they shouldn't have.
Ma'am, I will put the link to the two Vistals in the chat, but I'll tell you right now, I've already seen numerous conspiracy theories about how both of those companies are really owned by, somehow, I don't remember what the most bizarre allegation was against them, but I'm certain that there's other conspiracies about who they are or what they're actually owned by. But I will put the name of the companies in there and encourage you to do your own research in that regard. I understand your concerns, though, and again, all I'm doing is providing clarity on the laws and the regulations that we're following. If there's an intent to change those are separate processes outside of this adoption hearing.
I don't think you intentionally meant to do it, but I find that characterization of my questions as conspiracy theories a little bit disrespectful.
No, ma'am. No. I'm not saying that you. I'm just saying that in regards to these two companies that I know that there are conspiracies about them. But certainly, I want to provide you that information so that you can do your investigation on that and look into it. Mr. Moore, please.
Also, I don't like this conspiracy title. But when we have doubts about what is behind companies that are doing audits or behind companies that are creating machines or updating machines or creating patches, it's not conspiracy. In my opinion, the electorate, we have zero trust now since 2020, and we should have had zero trust since decades, but we were too naive. We're not naive anymore. And I think the problem is, from a bureaucratic standpoint, we're looking for solutions to make us, the machines better, but we don't have any trust in it. We don't trust the people making the codes for the machines. We don't trust the people making the machines. We don't trust where the access is, whether it's from abroad or whether it's from internal. We really have zero trust. And we want to go to hand counting of ballots. And if we can't do that, going over these regulations to say, okay, well, we're going to trust, this company or this office of federal government or state government is the shell game. It's hiding the P. We don't want these machines. And the only way that we can get this through is somehow we have to, as an electorate, stop it somehow. We hate it. If we can spend millions to line the pockets of politicians, like in other states, let's keep it out of Nevada, to buy machines for millions of dollars and upkeeps and $300,000, contracts for people looking at 80 hours worth of stuff, well, we can hire people. We can hire people to go ahead and count. The United States of America is not the only country in the world. There are many other countries in the world who actually still hand count. And I'm not talking about third world. Why are we doing this? Sorry, it's a little bit of a rant, but it's really frustrating. We can't get our governments to understand we don't trust the system anymore. And
Mr. Moore, thank you for your comments. And to be perfectly clear, like, I did not say any of you are believers in or adherents to conspiracy theories. I understand entirely your questioning, your desire to learn more and desire for increased transparency. In many cases, I recognize that you all have a desire to change the laws that are in place. Perfectly understandable that there are processes for all of that. Absolutely. My comment regarding conspiracy theories was simply that of the two voting system test laboratories that are out there, I do know that it's Pro VND and SLI compliance. I can't remember which one. I think it might have been Pro VND. In the same sense that you rightly so, as do I, want increased transparency, want on increased confidence that your vote counts just like mine. I also know that there's a significant amount of misinformation being pushed out there by both foreign and domestic actors intent on degrading confidence in our electoral process across the country. I'm not saying that again, questioning the laws or the regulations, or are you questioning elections officials at the county or state level is wrong? Not at all. Again, I encourage heartily involvement in these processes. I'm simply saying that while I point you to something like the 2 vistals that the AAC approves, I just want to warn you that there's misinformation out there. Are there things that are certainly worthy of asking them? Absolutely. Should you accept the status quo? Absolutely not. Don't. I'm entirely comfortable with that. I'm simply saying that there's information out there that is not true being peddled by people who don't know what they're talking about to spread hate and discontent. So I'm simply warning you. I'm not saying any of you are adherents to any of that. Again, I'm a little, I apologize if that came off that way at all. I don't think that at all, frankly. I just wanted to warn you that there is misinformation out there. Mr. Parks, please.
I'm sorry, Mark. I forgot to turn my hand off. Sorry.
Yes, sir. I understand. Thank you. Ms. White, please.
Yeah, okay. I know you're going to say this is outside the scope of this agenda, but I would love to know what your sources are to give you comfort that domestic or foreign actors are not involved in hacking the machines, and what in misinformation. What do you rely on for the truth? Basically, is what I'm asking you.
That is a pretty widespread question. I will tell you that and maybe perhaps we could set some time aside to briefly answer it, though. So again, don't get poked for straying too far from the agenda. At the Secretary of State level, we receive a number of classified briefs and presentations about, and from the federal government and in some cases, various members of the intelligence community that highlight specifically the domestic and foreign actors that are involved in attempting to disrupt our elections. And like you, I think, right? When I hear something, I question it. I don't look at one source. I look at numerous sources. Like, again, I suspect most of you do. Typically, though, I'm going to, when it comes to my professional role, I look very clearly at the statutes to understand what we have to do. I reach out to my election officials if I have questions. And again, I'm looking at the statutes and regulations that relate back to what's going on. And I apply a healthy dose of skepticism to everything, and in a professional sense, trying to find ways to improve it. Like I said, pleased but not satisfied. You may not believe it, but I consider every one of you, every one of the 1.8 million registered voters, to indirectly be my boss while I work for Secretary of State Sagaski. At the end of the day, when I hear people arguing about elections behind me in the grocery store line, I think, what would they want me to do? They would want me to dig deeper. They wouldn't want me to accept the status quo. They would want me to try to continue to investigate, to work late, to find these things that, an approach that frankly, the elections division as a whole and your county clerks and officials feel the same way about. So that there's a number of things, but we could talk separately. If you're willing to let me buy you coffee here in Carson sometime, I would love to talk to you about it further.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Martinez, please.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Again, for the record, Cindy Martinez, Vice Chair of the Washoe County Republican Party. I'm going to bring it back to the topic of test. Oh no, where am I? Okay, I'm still here. Bring it back to the topic of the scope of the regulation regarding testing. I would say, I think everybody's articulating my own thoughts and perspective about the use of the word conspiracy theories, misinformation, disinformation. I think probably the worst thing that ever happened to our country was what happened post coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. And the best thing that's happened to our country post SARS-CoV-2 is probably on the order of the Boston Tea Party, because we have an electorate that is awake, engaged, and actively involved in sussing out information, conducting investigations, and weighing evidence. So I know the people that I'm working with and I associate with, we are extraordinarily educated about the process, the vulnerabilities, and that's why we're here and we're speaking so vociferously and why we have lost faith in the process. And I would say also that we are at the point where the government has lost the consent of the governed. The challenge here is there's what, less than 40 of us here online, and most of our people are at work trying to keep their businesses going, digging ditches, stocking grocery shelves, cleaning teeth, teaching children. So we're representing the people that are trying to keep themselves going. So government should not misunderstand that there's so few people online that we don't care. We're carrying the concerns of all of the people that we're having contact with. So having said that, bringing it back to the issue of the testing, and I understand the scope of this particular regulation pertains to local testing, but as I mentioned yesterday, and I was scanning ahead to the regulations tomorrow, I'm not sure that there's really a place to talk about this, so I'm going to talk about this right here, and I asked you yesterday. Regarding the involvement of the Gaming Control Board, if you go to NRS 463.670, it speaks specifically about the licensing of certain manufacturers, sellers, and distributors. And then, of course, the corresponding Nevada Gaming Commission regulations pertaining to the regulation of electronic testings, gaming devices, et cetera, is Regulation 14, and there are standards. I would refer you to, and I'll put these in the chat, Regulations 14.350 to 420 pertains specifically to third-party independent labs that are certified by the Gaming Control Board. So, as I said before, when you talk about the Gaming Control Board, with the one division that is specifically tasked with the responsibility of oversight, the technology division, I know that there are not enough people to do what is claimed to be covered by the Secretary of State. So I do not have confidence that our electronic devices, because they're not machines, they're not mechanical, that these devices are impervious to hacking. They have modems, despite your previous protestations that they did not have modems. They do have modems, that's been established. That these are not secure, no matter how many times you test a paper in, paper out, no matter how many times you power it up, power it down. And I'm a former electronics technician in the Marine Corps, navigational aids technician, navigational aids. So I'm not just whistling Dixie, I'm not a dummy about, ONOFF. So I have grave concerns about, no matter how many regulations you put on paper and hold the respective county registrars responsible for implementing, we still do not have confidence in electronic devices that we know through various investigations are not secure. So I need we'd like to hear some information, please, precisely what the agreement is with the GCB, and if you could provide that contract that Valerie was talking about, and where we're going to get that paper trail so we know what the Gaming Control Board is doing and how they're doing it.
Yes, ma'am. So to start with, again, you're right. Ms. White did reference the contract, the interlocal contract between the Gaming Control Board and the Secretary of State. I'm not, again, it's a public document. This is something that when I was talking with our public information officer about briefly yesterday, she did ask that in regards to that contract itself, she has it and is able to provide it. She just asked that I do so by sending it everyone to her. I just put her email into the chat. It is sospio@sos.nv.gov. If you request that document from her, she'll be able to provide it. And you'll notice it's a 10-page document. I do have it here in front of me. The 9th and 10th pages talk about the scope of work and go into detail about what exactly is going to occur. This is something that, again, even after we talked yesterday, as I was doing my research to try to see what else we could get, it does, again, because of this interlocal agreement and the discussion between Gaming Control Board and Secretary of State, I know it's not the answer necessarily people are going to want to hear, but if you ask for information from my PIO, she'll coordinate with the Gaming Control Board PIO to either get the documents that are under the custody of Gaming Control Board, but there's no real information that we have that we're able to provide either independently or despite what Gaming Control Board wants to release. Again, there's even, well, I think that contract will likely open up additional questions and certainly open to following up with those separately. But again, when you look at 293B, specifically 1045 was the provision that I identified as being part and pertinent for this discussion. And real fast, I will put that into the chat just so that everybody has that as well. 293B, NRS 293B.1045 is the standards and procedures for approval of systems or devices by Secretary of State, along with the description of the regulations relating thereto. Again, that is part of the origin and the statutory basis for a discussion or before this contract with Gaming Control Board and Secretary of State. It is, again, this is something that's been going on since it sounds like the Heller administration was, I believe, when it was started, based on the information I could find. So again, this isn't something new. It's been in place for a while, and in part it relates to I think what some of you have already highlighted, right? Like we don't at the Secretary of State have the tools, the equipment, or the experience to conduct the full level of testing that would need to be done for these systems. Which is why, again, this contract is in place to help facilitate that. And again, in the contract, you'll see that it talks again about the scope of work, what needs to be done, what they're looking at, which includes, a review of documentation, source code, and materials related thereto. So again, as you can imagine, when a system is submitted to the EAC for review, and there are 7 or 8 different organizations that have submitted voting systems to the EAC for certification. After they go through that process, then they can apply to the Secretary of State for review for inclusion on our list of certified machines. Right now, only 2 systems have done that, and those were done years ago. Once those systems are submitted, that initial review is going to be far more in depth than it is on a more sustained basis. So again, is my understanding, and this was something that occurred well before I became part of this agency, that those initial reviews of the testing systems were far more elaborate and detailed and in depth than the normal county level or even routine assessments that are conducted now. Because that initial one was so thorough, as patches are applied, we go through a very deliberate patching certification process to confirm, again, in coordination with the Gaming Control Board. So that way the reviews that are done for the most recent patches, again, like talking about the font updates and those sorts of things, are not multi-week, multi-month type reviews. If there's a physical change to the machine, the hardware, or any of those sorts of things, again, the Gaming Control Board does disassemble and review the components as applicable. But again, I understand your concerns. You certainly are not the only persons who have brought this up and raised this as a concern recently, and that's another aspect that we are looking closely at. That is part of our ongoing effort to continue to improve. I will lastly say that in regards to this contract, it does expire on February 1st of 2023. This interlocal contract between Gaming Control Board and the Secretary of State. So we will again be renegotiating the contract towards the end of this year, leading up to that deadline. And again, right, everything we do is transparent as a government entity. That process, again, I'm telling you, not so that you don't think that we're trying to renegotiate or do anything under the cover of darkness, but we'll certainly make that process be known. And when the new contract is out, again, I'm assuming it will be likely on or before February 1st of next year, that updated document will certainly be available for public review. Ms. Reyes, please.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. And Mark, with all due respect, how do you pronounce your last name? You're on mute.
Yes, ma'am. It's said Voloshin. It's said with a V, but it's spelt with a W. For what it's worth, it helps to not look at it when you say it. Otherwise, you'll probably say it wrong. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, Mark, my questions are directed to you personally, please. And you said you're an honorable man, and I appreciate that. And thank you so much for your service. I'm very patriotic. My question for you, for the record, do you believe that our electronic devices, our computers, our phones can be remotely accessed. Are you under the belief that any electronic device, phones or computers can be remotely accessed? And this is on the record. On the record.
Yes, ma'am. I have no problem stating on the record. I guess I'm curious as to why you want my personal opinion.
I would like your response because you're the deputy secretary, you're representing,
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
bringing all this information to us, and these are going to be changes made. So
Yes,
let's go
ma'am.
back to the question.
Right.
I'm asking you personally,
Okay,
and you're an honorable man,
I am.
and on the record,
On the record.
is it your belief that our electronic computers, phones, any electronic device can be remotely accessed, hacked
So
into?
That's what I wanted to clarify, because what you're stating isn't. I think
That's
the
a yes or
question-
no.
Oh, it's
Mark,
not though.
that's no, excuse me. Your belief, yes or no?
Ms.
Yes or
Reyes.
no? Can they be accessed, hacked into? Just a yes or no.
Mark, can I just jump in for a second here?
Please.
This is not a deposition or trial of Deputy Voloshin.
Thank you,
Um,
Greg. I
I-
asked for his opinion.
I
And this is
understand
on
that,
the
ma'am.
record.
I understand that, ma'am. My job here is to make sure that we are obeying the open meeting law, and we're making sure that we are giving all
First
people.
Amendment, freedom of speech. I'm asking a question for clarification. I'm hoping that my question gets answered. This is an open meeting law. I'm asking a question. The question is being avoided to be answered. So
Well,
what is so important is because earlier to Mr. Moore, Mark had said conspiracy theories, and he apologized if he was coming across wrong. This is not a conspiracy theory, Greg. You know it and Mark knows it. Any electronic device can be hacked into, And for you
appreciate.
guys to continue to move forward in implementing more devices to be hacked into. And again, going back to programs, I'm no freaking nuclear scientist. However, but a model can be determined who wrote the program and what inputted information. If you want to orchestrate a certain result, you write the program. And for all these computers to be put together and who writes that program to put it in, I might go in there and vote for Mr. Smith, but at the end result, Mr. Smith only got 0.63 of the vote and Mr. Jones got it. I'll use that instead of let's go Brandon. But with that information, you're avoiding answering the question, Mark. There's no transparency, and Greg's there to go to bat for you to protect you. But once again, you're avoiding the question. So then to be accused of conspiracy theories, you won't answer the question. That's a simple yes or no. Do you
So,
believe
ma'am,
they can be hacked into, remotely accessed? Simple yes or no.
I just wanted to clarify, and I will let Mr. Voloshin fend for himself. I just want to make sure that we are focused on the items that are properly agendized and for discussion today. We can't turn this into a deposition of Mr. Voloshin. He is not here to address personal questions or specific general catch-all questions. I know that he has, through his grace, tried to provide a lot of information that is skirting the bounds of what has been agendized, and because I think that it has been productive and close to what has been agendized. I haven't stepped in. I just want to make sure that everybody remembers this is not a litigation or a deposition of Mr. Voloshin. It is.
It's not a
here to
deposition, Greg. It's a question. And you guys, just the simple fact, Greg, you're probably an attorney, who knows? But you guys are now attempting to avoid answering the question. It's a personal question. This isn't a deposition.
I'll
We didn't
answer it,
swear.
ma'am, as soon as you
Thank
stop interrupting and being rude. I'll certainly answer it.
And I appreciate your frustration, ma'am, and I've tried not to interrupt you, and I would appreciate it if you give us the same courtesy. I just want to make sure that we are staying on track. We have a number of people here who are presumably here to try to talk about regulations and who are waiting patiently, may have taken time away from their days, their families, whatever other issues that they are there for. And I want to keep us on track as much as possible. So I don't want this to devolve into, well, you ask a question and then maybe Mr. Camp has a question and other people have questions. So I just want to make sure that we are staying focused on the regulations. I'm not here to protect Deputy Voloshin. Practically, he doesn't need my protection. So I just want to make sure we're staying on task. So with that, I will go back quietly into the background.
Okay, and I apologize, Mark and Greg, and I don't appreciate the insults as well. I'm not rude. I want a question answered. There's no transparency. And for you people to implement more electronic devices to construe and have control over the end result of our votes, this is very frustrating. You get tired of being now being called rude, but a conspiracy theorist. When you won't even answer the question, and this is not a deposition, if you are avoiding, you won't answer simply that our computers and electronic devices and our phones can be remotely accessed. You won't answer the question. Right there tells us, why would you want more computers and electronic devices manipulating the outcome of our votes? We want paper ballots, simple as that. We want to be opt-in for mail-in ballots to be sent to us, not opt-out. Not everybody should get a mail-in ballot. It should be an opt-in for anybody going overseas or moved out. But again, you're avoiding answering this question. So please, we'll make note of this. Thank you.
May I answer?
Please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, perfect. Ballot marking devices cannot connect to the internet. Electronic poll books do connect to the internet, but do not connect to the ballot marking devices. The direct reporting equipment that you stand in front of that has a VVPAT next to it do not connect to the internet. Tabulation systems do not connect to the internet. E-polling books, though, again, do connect to the internet. I'm picturing a different style. E-polling books, again, so when you consider voting systems, it includes all of that. So I apologize for the hesitancy in answering a direct yes or no question, but I am honorable,
and when you
I do want to make sure that I'm accurate in my response.
And
That
Mark,
being said, ma'am, I do
and Mark,
appreciate.
to get that vote to you, there has to be a means to get that vote to you.
Ms. Reyes,
So
I'm excited to
unless-
spend time with you talking, and we can even arrange a meeting with your clerk so I can show you the very specific, county-specific way that that occurs. It's a complex process, and most people do not understand it. I had to learn it myself, but I will eagerly show you so that you can understand how it goes from a machine that is not connected to the internet to appearing on the Supreme Court canvas after somehow being aggregated at the state level. But
Mark,
that absolutely exceeds the scope.
Mark,
of
with my little mental ability, if I wrote you a letter and I put it in the envelope, once I drop it in the mailbox, I have no more control over the content of that letter and who receives it and how they interpret it or what they do with that letter once I drop it in. So going back to our electronic devices that you say are not hooked up to the internet, that will only stay in my possession like that letter until I send it off and you receive it. So once again, depending on how the programs are written, the end result is what you show us. And going back to just the basics, when I vote for Mr. Smith, I can't know any way, no shape, form, if I provide my social security number, that I get to know who I voted for the end result.
Ma'am, I would love to continue this conversation with you, but again, exceeds the scope of the regulations, is an entirely separate subject. And I truly appreciate your passion and concern. I feel the exact same way. I am also passionate about making sure that my vote counts and is not diluted or otherwise not accepted as exactly how I want to vote. But again, please promise me that you'll reach out, and I will set up a conversation in person with your clerk or registrar to go over these exact procedures as it relates here in Nevada. Not again, different machines in different states I can't speak to. Again, there are machines in this country that are required to have modems on them based on other states' laws. So again, not speaking in generalities, but speaking in Nevada and speaking about your county specifically, I absolutely will help provide that information. But this is just not the time or place. Ms. White, please.
You recommended that we reach out to the PIO for the contract for the testing. Can you give me the exact name of the contract so I don't waste the PIO's time in trying to figure out what I'm asking for? I did get one page of a contract that gave me the 320,000 and the 80 hours or whatever, but it did not have multiple pages. All I saw was a signed document, but it did not have multiple pages defining.
Yes, ma'am. It specifically is the interlocal contract between Gaming Control Board and SOS dated December of 2019.
Okay, thank you. I just put that in the chat. And then my second question,
Excellent.
is there a flow chart that documents the certification process? Again, the PIO did provide me with lots of materials and I did skim through it, but there are probably 300 pages of material from the EAC and the manufacturer's documentation. And it would be much easier, it would increase transparency and trust if there were a flow chart, a visual infographic that would describe the process, because I don't think many people, unless that's your full-time job, would actually read through all of that documentation.
I wholeheartedly agree, ma'am. And when it comes to elections, there is certainly a plethora of documents out there. Very recently, I completed I believe it's a 2-page summary. I think the 3rd page maybe has a flow chart on it, but the details are our certification process. So yes, I did provide that to our PIO recently. She now has that as well. But yes, ma'am, I appreciate it. And that's, you highlight a great point. A continued part of the effort of the agency is to make sure that we're taking these mountains of information and complex federal guidance and trying to explain, carve out the other state stuff and make it state specific so that that's available to the public. But yes, ma'am, bottom line, our PIO has a document like that now that highlights and explains the state certification.
Okay, and so would that contract, just digging a little deeper, I would like to know the actual functions that the testing company is running on the equipment. So what is the name of the document that I would request to know what functions of the software system are being tested?
Again, I think the Gaming Control Board contract would have parts of that. It also would depend on the nature of the certification. And that, I think, ultimately would be something maybe more suited for Gaming Control Board to explain. The idea of an initial review as opposed to a minor font-based modification. I'll see if we have anything though, and I'll talk to our PIO about making that available as well. I do suspect, based on the information I researched yesterday, that likely would be something that they have. And again, right, the voting systems that we have were approved for use in 2018. It was a statewide update to the machines. So I would think that sort of documentation would be fairly recent and possibly available. So it's not like it's a 2003 type document, in other words, but from 2018 instead. Does that help?
Well, yeah, kind of, but you're telling me I need to reach out to the Gaming Control Board. So if you could just give me a name of what documentation I'm actually asking for.
Yes, ma'am. I don't know what that would be called outside of anything relating to maybe the initial assessment of voting systems in 2018. That initial, I think, is the key word, because that way it would be the most all-encompassing type of review, as I understand it.
Okay, and does the PIO kind of function as an ombudsman that would assist me in communicating with the Gaming Control Board as far as documentation?
So I think our PIO really helps facilitate and clarify Secretary of State type questions. I don't know what she could really do outside of maybe pointing you to the PIO for the Gaming Control Board. we, in between agencies, that there's not too much that we can really do in regards to, acting as an ombudsman, so to speak.
The problem I just faced in my backyard, there's an open easement and there's some tractors out there doing stuff. And so I tried to find out who had the permit on it. And just in Washoe County, there were, 15 different departments that I could reach out to try to get the permit. I'm using an example to let you know how difficult it is to pinpoint where I need to ask and who and the title of what I'm asking for. I don't want to have, 15 go back and forth with the PIO. So I'm asking for some
Yes,
assistance
ma'am.
from you.
Our PIO will be able to tell you that the Gaming Control Board point of contact that she talks to, and that absolutely would at the very least hone it in more specifically on one individual. But again, the documents you're asking about, I honestly haven't seen myself from 2018. So please understand, I'm trying to provide as much of a description as possible, but outside of that, I don't know what else what they would be called or what they would look like, frankly.
Okay, well, I might be calling you for holding my hand to walk through this, because
Please.
little Valerie, citizen, is nobody, but if your name will help get some action, I'd appreciate your assistance.
I don't know if my name will help, ma'am, but I'll certainly give you the service of whatever I can. My name seems to confuse more people than not, but yes, ma'am, I'm certainly eager to help in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Camp, please.
Mark Camp, Republican candidate for Nye County Clerk. I understand everyone's frustration, and that's why I'm running to be Nye County Clerk, so I can take this heat as the next Nye County Clerk. I do believe that we should adopt the regulation R111-21 as amended, because it's a necessary function for those counties that are using a mechanical voting system. Besides that, some of the discussions have been about other things that go beyond this, and I recommend that those that are concerned about the types of equipment that are used and the types of audits that are being recommended, get with your county commissioners, because they are the only ones that can make such changes and request such audits. And only by getting involved at the local level can you influence whether or not the mechanical systems are used or a paper ballot is used. And this has to be done through the local county commissioners. The Secretary of State, as I understand it, can recommend the type of systems that can be used and provide a joint agreement for by opting into using those systems, but it is the county commissioner and the county clerk. I found that the county clerks currently are very receptive to questions and to providing information on that. So I recommend that we adopt this regulation and move on. Again, get involved with your elections so that we can change the laws going forward, because that's the only way that it's going to change. Thank you very much.
Mr. Grant, thank you for your comments, and the ever so gentle reminder to me to get back on track with the adoption hearing. At this time, if there's any other public comment relating to proposed regulation R111-21, please let me know.
Mark Darley, for the record. I just am listening to this endless conversation about the complexities and the problems that we have had with the machine voting. And there are other countries, namely Germany and several other, not third world countries, that are using and have gone back to paper ballots. So just for the record, I wanted to say that seems to me to be the easiest way of getting rid of all this electronic complexity that requires all of these endless regulations to secure our vote. And paper ballots with ID voter identification is certainly seems to be the clearest answer. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Moore, please.
Yes, Mark, please. Can you express to us why you and your office and the SOS believe we need machines and why we cannot go to hand counting?
Mr. Moore, I will buy you coffee repeatedly and carve out hours of my day to discuss the background and processes with you. But as I was politely reminded a moment ago, we do need to keep this to the focus of these adoptions.
I can't accept that as an answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Voloshin.
I understand. I apologize for disappointing you.
No, please. I'm not asking for anything outside this scope. I'm trying to understand, and honestly trying to understand, what is it that your office has studied in your millions of hours that you claim that you put on it, exaggerated, that gives you the conclusion, where you come to the conclusion, and the Secretary of State comes to the conclusion that Nevada needs to have machines handle the counting and the voting. Give us that context, so maybe we can understand why we're all wrong, that hand counting cannot work, and Germany does it because they have a different system, and France does it. What makes us so different that we cannot do it?
Mr. Moore, I'll address this quickly and then we'll move back to the proposed regulations. The bottom line is that there's no statutory requirement to use machines. I never said there was. In fact, there are provisions in both statute and regulation that allow for jurisdictions to use paper ballots. It might surprise you after me trying to explain the laws a minute ago, that we've actually researched and spent time looking at what do regulations look like for all paper ballot elections. That research is continuing to be ongoing as well. Ultimately, the Secretary of State and the Elections Division, as well as the county clerks and registrars, follow the laws of Title 24, the state and federal laws that relate to elections in this country and this state specifically. And to that end, this division specifically does everything within its abilities to make sure that the laws are applied in a secure and fair manner. But we don't leave a stone unturned. We don't only ask opinions of states that we think are neat or agree with. The goal is to look at regulations and to prepare so that if in the 23 legislative session, voting machines are outlawed, we're prepared to have regulations that help support paper ballot elections. Or again, there's numerous things. Mr. Camp touched on it, but ultimately it's a county commissioner and county decision as to what systems to use. There is a requirement that they be EAC approved and approved by the state. They have to meet or exceed the requirements. But ultimately, if a county transitions to one machine system or another, like Lander County did fairly recently, again, that's up to them. The Secretary of State has no say in what the county does in that regard, outside of making sure that it applies within the confines of the existing statutes. And really, again, from our point of view, we're here to help support the county clerks, support their electorates to make sure that the election is secure and fair, regardless of the machines or the paper ballots or whatever process they end up using within the confines of Title 24. That being said,
Thank you for that answer. And just as an uninformed citizen, I would like your help in understanding then how we go about making that for those of us that want to go ahead and change it, to get rid of machines and become paper ballot. What is the forum for that? How do we go ahead and do that? How do we get that on a ballot? Or how do we get that in discussion? If you can give me just 1 or 2 sentences, so I know at least we have a chance, one vote at a time, to get rid of these damn machines.
Step one is to please explain your concerns to your representatives. Your senator, your assemblyman or woman, depending on where you're at, they're the ones that you want to talk to express your concerns. Again, regardless of them, along with I'm sure the party that you're part of and the central committee might be a good starting point as well. But those, sir, are the individuals that you would need to talk to.
Thank you.
At this time, is there any other public comment regarding proposed regulation R111-21? Seeing none, I will close public comment regarding proposed regulation R111-21. Because it has been a minute of discussion, I do want to explain again and reiterate that we are amending the proposed text of proposed regulation R111-21. The text will be amended to read not earlier than 5 weeks before and not later than 1 week before the first day of early voting. That will be the amended text. Therefore, without any, now the public comment is closed. Regulation LCB file number R111-21 is adopted with the changes as mentioned on the record and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. I will now open the adoption hearing for proposed regulation R112-21. R112-21, if you're following along on the text, is on page 63 of 64. Existing law authorizes the Board of County Commissioners of any county to purchase and adopt for use in elections any mechanical voting system. A mechanical voting system is a system of voting whereby a voter may cast a vote. One, on a device which mechanically or electronically compiles a total of the number of votes cast for each candidate and for or against each measure voted on, or two, by marking a paper ballot which is subsequently counted as an electronic tabulator, counting device, or computer. This regulation provides that not later than 180 days before each election, the Secretary of State will prepare and send to each county clerk of a county that will use a mechanical voting system for election a report that sets forth the official title for each race that will be on the ballot. This regulation further requires the county clerk to ensure that the mechanical voting system used in the county uses the official title set forth in the report for each race that is on the ballot. We did not receive very much information on this or feedback regarding to the regulation specifically. So therefore, there is no proposed changes to the text on pages 64 or 65 of proposed regulation R112-21P. If there's anybody interested in providing, at this time, I will open public comment on proposed regulation R112-21P. If anyone's interested in making public comment, please go ahead and indicate so now. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. I'm not looking at the entire thing, but is the official name of each candidate addressed in this regulation, or is it just the title of the race?
Just the title of the race.
Okay, and so what would be the NRS code that addresses the title of the candidate?
There's actually a number of regulations and statutes that relate back to everything from the use of nicknames to the titles. In a moment, I can find that. I'll track it down real quick and put it into the chat for you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And we'd appreciate having the links to the recording of this meeting, if you could
Yes,
put that
ma'am.
in there as well. Thank you.
So the links, first of all, there's a section in NRS 293 that relates to ballots. It starts with NRS 293.256, which I just put the in the chat. That starts with names of candidates on ballots, not to include title, designation of profession or occupation. And then it goes down through a series of other ones. It talks about the use of given names, surnames, nicknames, and a couple others. But that really 256 and then 256, 2565 is actually, those are the two I think that are probably directly what you're looking for. And then in regards to the links to these videos, yes, ma'am. I believe you've seen from before, but I'll put it into the chat for this. Excuse me one second. For this adoption hearing, we do have a website, again, for everyone's awareness about election regulations that we built specifically to increase, again, public transparency. I'm putting that link in the chat right now as well. You'll notice that we have videos of adoption hearings. The one from yesterday, we're going to post today as soon as we're done. Once we're done with this one, it does take about a half hour for the file to finish compiling, and then about another half hour for that for us to put it on YouTube. And then I will have the link on the website that I just put there about elections regulations for all of you to have access to.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. At this time, is there any other public comment relating to proposed regulation R112-21? Seeing none, I will close public comment on proposed regulation R112-21. Sure. Proposed regulation LCB file number R112-21 is adopted and will move forward to the Legislative Commission. At this time, we have an opportunity for public comment on matters other than the previously discussed LCB file numbers. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Is anyone interested in providing public comment about a matter not on the agenda? If so, please identify yourself. And again, just a reminder, be sure to state your name for the record. Ms. White, please.
Thank you. Would it be possible for you to summarize, just give us a list of which ones you're sending directly to the Legislative Commission from today's regulations?
I'm
Or are
sorry,
they all going?
Oh, no,
Oh.
ma'am, that first one is not. The first one was not adopted.
Okay, but the rest of them are.
Yes, either as is, as I specified, or there was, I think, 4 that we had amendments to.
Yeah, could you just highlight maybe which 4 had amendments? And as I understand from previous questions, the amended language is not available to us until 3 days before the legislation commission meets. Is that correct?
So no later than 3 days before, but I talked to LCB about this yesterday. I've already provided them the feedback on our adoption hearing yesterday, so they're already working on the text. But you're right, that they do have until up to the 3rd day before, but there's a possibility that will come out afterwards. And then in regards to the regulations for today, again, the first one, R080-21P, was not adopted. There were no changes to R081. To R082, R083, R084, R110 and 111 were both amended. And that text, and again, the descriptions are from before, then 112 did not have any changes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Martinez, please.
Yes, thank you, Mark. For the record, Cindy Martinez, Vice Chair of the Washoe County Republican Party. I want to thank you again for your forbearance, your patience. This has been a very wide-ranging conversation, and you have been very gracious in permitting conversations that have strayed from the scope of the agenda. Many of us have been to other meetings where we have been severely restricted, and I personally appreciate your allowing us to exercise our First Amendment. And I'm sure that you're absorbing all of that. And to my fellow citizens that are on this call in Washoe County, we are working currently with the Washoe County on getting information to the Washoe County Commission next Tuesday. So we need you to show up February 8th at the Washoe County Chambers for the 10 o'clock meeting. Now they've got a security screen, so we're anticipating a large number of people. You need to come early because don't bring your folding pocket knife and your concealed carry. Leave all that stuff at home. But this is the opportunity with the things that we're talking about here today. Even though we're giving feedback on how to amend the respective regulations, ultimately, the only change can be accomplished at the legislature to make all of this go away. That won't happen until November into 2023 if we're successful. The only way to grab hold and regain control of our electoral process is at the county level. We, the people, the grassroots, have the power, the responsibility to engage and stay engaged. I know we have been engaged since December 15, 2020, fighting the COVID restrictions, and people are losing steam. You cannot lose steam. It took 8 years to complete the American Revolution. We need sustained engagement. And there are many people that are on this call today that have been accompanying us to the Washoe County Commission. So to my Washoe County fellow citizens, February 8th, 10 a.m., plan on arriving at 9:30, and we need you to stay for the entire meeting. And that includes our friends on the other side of the aisle. This isn't just a conservative issue. This is a constitutional freedom issue. So we invite everybody to give informed consent, so to speak, on what you expect out of your electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Mr. Benton, please.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. We all want transparency and confidence in our elections. And I want to thank you for holding this Zoom meeting and trying to inform us about possible changes and give us the opportunity to speak. So I really appreciate your knowledge and willingness. I do want to bring up that I am very concerned about electronic devices and voting machines. because there's been a long history of major corporations, the government being hacked by hackers. I've also heard that the military has been hacked several times. I heard that from a military person. So first of all, I think that raises a red flag that if we could avoid all the additional possible protections, we could go to paper ballots. So I'm encouraging the Secretary of State to consider going to paper ballots, making the record keeping. Oh, also I want to mention the record keeping. I'd like to see that lengthened to 2.5 years. So that would go beyond the next election. So if there was someone that had a question, excuse me, they could go back and evaluate that. So I want to thank you for this time. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Benton. I appreciate your involvement today as well. At this time, is there anybody else interested in making public comment regarding an item not on today's agenda? Excellent. The last thing I will say, I do want to remind everybody, let's see, in that case, I'll close public comment. As a reminder, this adoption hearing is not the end of the process. As I mentioned before, following the completion of the adoption hearing today, the next step will be the Legislative Commission on February 28th at 1 p.m. I am putting the link again to that meeting in the chat. That will be where the agenda is posted, along with the everything from the location to send your public comment to the Zoom link, or however they end up doing it, the location, if it ends up being in person or they offer an in-person location, all of that will be there. That's the site that I'm going to be checking as well to find out about the meeting. And I wanted to make sure that you all have that. Again, finally, thank you all for your comments. Again, I appreciate you taking time, over the last few hours. Again, I appreciate that you're as passionate about elections as I am, and equally concerned. So again, thank you for your time and attention today. If there's anything else that the Office of the Secretary of State can do to help answer questions, explain, or do whatever, again, by all means, please don't hesitate to reach out. I've provided in the chat a number of other ways. Otherwise, again, just a reminder, tomorrow we have a workshop. It's not an adoption hearing tomorrow. It's a workshop on the additional regulations to see if there's any additional feedback, before we get to the adoption hearing. The regulations we're hearing tomorrow in a workshop, we'll have an adoption hearing coming up on February 22nd at 8 a.m. And that notice is also on our website, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to put it into the chat as well so that nobody has to go looking for it.
And what is that meeting about, the 22nd?
The 22nd is the adoption hearing for the regulations we're going to discuss tomorrow. Do you remember back on, and I think you might have been involved on January 19th, we had a workshop, but then we're having a similar, it's the same regulations, nothing has changed, just an extra opportunity to get additional feedback. The same regulations we talked about on February 19th, we're going to talk about tomorrow, and then those will be adopted on February 22nd.
And could you confirm that the link in the general notice for tomorrow's workshop is functioning and not a 404 error page?
Certainly.
Although I'll tell you, this one document, with the 65 pages, that was very convenient too.
Oh,
so
good. Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
but for people who weren't online with us, they would still access this other document, the notice.
Yes, ma'am. And the one I just published, or just put into the chat, that is the notice for February 22nd at 8 a.m. That's 134 pages, a little more voluminous, but I agree. I prefer the single page for reference. So that's the 22nd. I put that into the chat. That's that one. And then you're asking for the one tomorrow as well.
Just to make sure on that notice that, the link is working.
Yeah, I have noticed that the notices, I recognize that notices get copied and pasted into different locations, and you're right, end up, sometimes not working. So that is the link for the workshop tomorrow. That one is 134 pages for tomorrow. So again, slight differences in the two documents, but really a lot of that's just the wording from an adoption hearing on the top to the workshop tomorrow. But if you already provided comment, again, it is the exact same, like there's no changes discussed. It really would just be receiving feedback on those regulations tomorrow morning. But if you want to be involved or hear the accepted changes, that won't be until the 22nd. And that's when we'll, again, between now and the 22nd, consider the feedback received January 19th, tomorrow as well. And then we'll discuss that and go into detail what the secretary accepts out of those recommendations on the 22nd, just to be clear on that process. Unless there's any other questions though, again, appreciate your time.
I do. I'm just curious, how much input did you receive via email on these regulations and yesterday's and tomorrow's? Did you receive, hundreds or dozens or?
The latest email came in less than 2 minutes ago. It hasn't stopped. So,
So you would say hundreds?
I would say easily hundreds. I don't know if it's quite crested 1,000, but it's certainly, I would say probably more than 400, at least written responses via email. Then also, of course, the public comment we received during the workshops, which during the first 3 workshops was over 12 hours. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You're very welcome. Again, plenty to do, so I'll get back to work. Again, doing the work that I suspect you would want me to do immediately, we will be doing. So thank you again for your time and attention. We'll talk to you soon.